this isn't exciting. That's the point. So take the pressure off, relax, and let these old stories guide you gently towards sleep. And if you feel like these videos are of any use to you, then you can like and subscribe, but only if you really feel like it. And now, let's begin. Sand, solitude, and survival. 3 words that pretty much sum up the Bedouin lifestyle, or as they might have called it, just another Tuesday. These desert nomads have been strutting their stuff across the Arabian Peninsula for millennia, long before any hashtag could capture their vibe. But don't let the Instagram-filtered mirage of a romantic nomadic life fool you. Beneath the flowing robes and windswept dunes lies a hard-knocked life filled with economic necessity and gritty realism. The Bedouins, whose name comes from the Arabic Badawi, meaning desert dweller, trace their roots back to the Arabian Peninsula's earliest days. It's a title well earned, considering they were navigating these vast stretches of sand long before indoor plumbing or air conditioning were even twinkles in human ingenuity's eye. But why the desert, you ask? Why choose a place where the sun's so hot it feels like it's trying to melt your face off? Well, necessity is the mother of invention, and when your options are limited to rock, sand, and a smattering of thorny bushes, you make do. Nomadism wasn't just a whimsical detour, it was survival 101. We're talking about a lifestyle where moving every few weeks was as routine as grocery shopping. But instead of aisles and carts, it was pastures and camels. The Bedouins had a knack for sniffing out water and grazing land like a sommelier with a fine wine. Their secret weapon? The camel, a beast so iconic to their way of life that it might as well have been their mascot. These ships of the desert could cover up to 100 miles in a day, making them the ultimate all-terrain vehicle of their time. Not to mention, they could go days without water, which is pretty handy when your local watering hole is a mirage. Economics played a starring role in their nomadic script. With limited resources, the Bedouins learned to adapt to the harsh realities of their environment. Trading was their bread and butter, engaging in barter with settled communities for essentials they couldn't provide for themselves. They were the OG traders, dealing in everything from livestock to handcrafted goods, long before the Silk Road was the talk of the town. Now, about that noble nomad trope. It's easy to romanticize the idea of a freewheeling existence under the stars with nothing but the desert as your kingdom. And sure, there's a certain appeal to the notion of living in harmony with nature, untethered by the trappings of modern life. But let's be real, this was no endless vacation. Try sustaining your family on limited resources in a landscape where a sandstorm could play peekaboo with your tent at any moment. The Bedouins were masters of making do, but it wasn't without its share of challenges. For every image of a lone rider silhouetted against a golden sunset, there's another of a family huddled against the cold, sharing what little food they have. Resources were the ultimate currency, and managing them was both art and science. They had a saying, "Eat with the seasons, drink with the rains." It's a poetic way of saying, you better plan, or you're toast. The Bedouins' ability to adapt to a lifestyle that demanded constant movement and innovation is nothing short of remarkable. But it wasn't all survival and grit. There was a vibrant social fabric woven between the tribes. Oral traditions, poetry, and music were vital threads, preserving their history and providing a sense of identity. They were storytellers as much as they were survivors, ensuring that their legacy traveled as far as their camels could roam. In the grand tapestry of human history, the Bedouins remind us of the resilience and adaptability that come with living on the edge of survival. Their story is one of balancing on the razor's edge between myth and reality, where the legend of the noble nomad dances with the stark truth of harsh desert life. So, next time you take a sip of water or complain about the heat, spare a thought for the Bedouins who turn necessity into an art form, all while riding on the humps of their trusty camels. As we leave behind the image of the Bedouins transforming necessity into an art form, let's dive deeper into the social tapestry that held these desert tribes together. Picture a hierarchy as intricate as a sand dune's curves, with the sheikh as its undisputed peak. The sheikh wasn't just a desert king lounging on a makeshift throne of camel saddles. Oh no, he was the tribal linchpin, the one who decided when to move, where to camp, and who to trade with. But don't imagine him as a solitary ruler with a penchant for tyranny. His power was more like a delicate negotiation than a decree. He had to keep the tribal council and influential families on his side, or risk being dethroned faster than a camel can spit. Beneath the sheikh were the warriors, the muscle of the tribe, wielding swords and spears like extensions of their own arms. Their code of honor, or murua, was the stuff of legends, embodying bravery, hospitality, and a dash of that desert swagger. This wasn't just about brawn, though. In a land where survival hinged on cooperation, murua was their unwritten constitution, ensuring that disputes were settled and alliances forged. Think of it as the original desert code, if only they had a hashtag. And let's not forget, the artisans and poets, the cultural bedrock who turned oral tradition into an art form. In a world without Netflix, the Bedouins had their own blockbuster nights. Gathered under a sky that seemed to drip stars, they shared epic tales and poems that did more than entertain. They were the tribal Wikipedia, preserving history, teaching lessons, and even settling scores. It was real-life bardic inspiration, if you will. Speaking of poetry, let's unpack the myth of the warrior poet. It sounds like a romantic notion, right? A valiant fighter who could also craft couplets that would make Shakespeare jealous. But it wasn't just about flowery language. Bedouin poetry was as much about survival as it was about sonnets. Take the famous pre-Islamic poet-warrior Antara ibn Shaddad. His verses weren't just love letters to the desert. They were strategic guides, boasting of his prowess in battle and securing his reputation as someone you didn't want to mess with. Antara was like the rock star of his time, the Mick Jagger of the Arabian sands, if you will. One of Antara's most famous lines goes something like this: "I have become great by my spear and my sword." Not exactly the kind of thing you'd find in a Hallmark card, but it worked wonders for his street cred. His poetry served as both a personal brand and a public service announcement: don't cross me unless you're ready for a showdown. But why was the warrior poet trope so compelling? Well, in a world where literacy was as rare as a rainstorm, poetry was the currency of information. It was a way to remember family lineage, heroic deeds, and tribal laws. Imagine having to recall your entire family history through song. It's like a never-ending musical, only you couldn't skip to the next track. The impact of these oral traditions was profound. They didn't just preserve culture, they forged it. When a poem celebrated a warrior's bravery or a tribe's resilience, it became a part of their collective identity. It was a way to pass down values and lessons to generations who might never see the inside of a classroom. And let's face it, when the nearest library is a week's ride away, you make do with what you've got. Yet, amid all this romanticism, let's not forget the harsh economic realities underpinning these cultural expressions. Bedouin poetry wasn't just a way to kill time between battles or trading trips. It was a practical tool for survival. By extolling the virtues of hospitality, for example, poets reinforced a social safety net that was vital in a landscape where resources were scarce. Sharing food and shelter with strangers wasn't just nice, it was necessary. Think of it as desert diplomacy with a poetic twist. Now, as we bring this part of the story to a close, let's leave a little room for mystery, while the legacy of Bedouin oral traditions continues to echo through the sands of time. There's more to explore in the tales of their resilience and adaptability. So, keep your mental camel saddled and your curiosity stoked, because the next leg of our journey promises more insights into a world where history was as fluid as the shifting sands beneath their feet. Now, as we saddle up for this next leg of our journey, let's talk about something as spicy as a Bedouin tale under a starry sky: economics. Specifically, how the Bedouins managed to carve out a niche in the bustling world of ancient trade, all while traversing landscapes that would make even the most seasoned traveller clutch their water bottle a little tighter. The Bedouins were, in many ways, the middlemen of the ancient world, a role they played with the finesse of a chess grandmaster. Picture this. The Arabian Peninsula was more than just a vast expanse of sand. It was the crossroads of the ancient spice trade, a network so intricate and far-reaching that it makes the modern global economy look like child's play. We're talking about routes that stretched from the Indian subcontinent to the Mediterranean, with spices like pepper, cinnamon, and frankincense as the headlining acts. These goods were the iPhones of their day, highly coveted, worth their weight in gold, and capable of making traders very, very rich. Enter the Bedouins with their camels and uncanny knack for navigating the desert. They were the logistical wizards who made it all happen, ensuring that spices and other exotic goods reached their destinations. Their reputation for hospitality and neutrality wasn't just a cultural quirk, it was a strategic advantage. In a world where tribal conflicts could flare up faster than you can say oasis, the Bedouins' ability to remain impartial made them the ideal intermediaries. They were like Switzerland, but with fewer watches and more sand. Take the incense route, for example, a key artery in this ancient trade network. This route was no mere dirt track. It was a well-trodden path stretching over 2,400 kilometers, linking the incense-producing regions of southern Arabia with the markets of the Mediterranean. The Bedouins were the custodians of this route, their camels laden with precious cargo that would eventually perfume the temples and palaces of Europe. Talk about a sweet gig, literally. But it wasn't just incense that the Bedouins transported. They dealt in a veritable cornucopia of goods, myrrh, silk, precious stones, and even exotic animals. Their trading prowess was legendary, and their caravans were the ancient equivalent of freight trains, chugging across the desert with a steady rhythm that only the camels could maintain. And let's not forget the bartering skills of the Bedouins, which were as sharp as a scimitar. They knew the value of their goods better than anyone, and they had an uncanny ability to strike deals that left both parties feeling like they got the better end of the bargain. Now, let's debunk a myth or two. It's easy to romanticize the Bedouins as free-roaming merchants, but the truth is, their economic activities were anything but leisurely. The desert was a harsh taskmaster, and the pressures of trade demanded constant vigilance. There were taxes to pay, both to the tribes whose lands they crossed and to the rulers who controlled the cities at either end of their routes. Not to mention the ever-present threat of bandits, who would love nothing more than to relieve a caravan of its valuable cargo. The Bedouins had to be as shrewd as they were tough, always calculating the risks and rewards of each journey. Yet despite these challenges, the Bedouins thrived. Their ability to adapt to the economic pressures of their environment was nothing short of remarkable. They were the original gig workers hustling across the desert to make a living, and they did it all with a flair that would make any modern entrepreneur envious. But why, you ask, was the spice trade so important? Well, in the ancient world, spices were more than just culinary luxuries. They were status symbols, medicinal remedies, and even religious offerings. A pinch of cinnamon could elevate a dish from mundane to divine, while a few drops of frankincense were believed to ward off evil spirits. In short, spices were the Swiss army knives of the ancient world. Versatile, valuable, and highly sought after. The global influence of the spice trade cannot be overstated. It connected cultures and economies in a way that few other commodities could. And the Bedouins, with their unique position as intermediaries, were at the heart of this vibrant network. They were the unsung heroes of the ancient economy, their contributions often overlooked in the grand narratives of history. So, next time you sprinkle a little pepper on your pasta or light a scented candle, spare a thought for the Bedouins. They were the original spice traders, navigating the shifting sands of commerce with skill and determination. Their legacy is a testament to the power of trade to transcend borders and bring people together, one camel caravan at a time. As we leave the spice-laden trails of the ancient world behind, let's keep our eyes on the horizon. The story of the Bedouins is far from over, and there are more layers to uncover in the sands of time. So, saddle up and stay curious, because the next chapter promises even more insights into the lives of these remarkable desert dwellers. As the Bedouins navigated the sandy highways of the ancient spice trade, they weren't just connecting cultures. They were also rubbing shoulders with some of history's heavyweights. From the Romans to the Ottomans, these desert dwellers were the original diplomats, wielding alliances and conflicts like a double-edged sword. So, let's dive into this political melee and see how the nomads managed to keep their heads above the proverbial sands of time. First up, let's talk Romans. You know, the toga-wearing empire with a penchant for conquering everything in sight. The Romans weren't exactly known for their subtlety, but even they recognized the strategic importance of the Arabian Peninsula. As the Roman Empire expanded eastward, they encountered the Bedouins, who were far from the isolated nomads of popular myth. On the contrary, the Bedouins were skilled negotiators, striking deals that allowed them to maintain their independence while facilitating Roman trade. Take the Nabateans, a Bedouin tribe that became fabulously wealthy by controlling trade routes through what is now Jordan. Their capital, Petra, was a marvel of engineering, carved into rose-red cliffs, a testament to the Bedouins' ability to adapt and thrive. The Nabateans had a knack for playing both sides, acting as middlemen between the Romans and other regional powers. They even minted their own currency, a bold move that showed they weren't just trading in spices, they were trading in influence. But alliances have a way of turning sour, and the Bedouins were no strangers to conflict. When Rome decided that friendly trade wasn't enough and annexed Nabatea in 1006 AD, the Bedouins had to pivot. They adapted by forging new alliances and finding alternative trade routes, demonstrating their resilience and resourcefulness in the face of imperial overreach. It was like a game of chess, only with more sand and fewer pieces. Fast forward a few centuries, and the scenario repeats itself with the rise of the Islamic caliphates. The Bedouins' intimate knowledge of the desert made them invaluable allies to the early Muslim armies. Their ability to navigate the harsh terrain allowed them to act as scouts and guides, ensuring that armies could move swiftly and efficiently across the Arabian Peninsula. The Battle of Barda in 624 AD is a prime example, where Bedouin scouts played a crucial role in the Muslim victory over the Quraysh. This symbiotic relationship between the Bedouins and the Caliphates wasn't just about military advantage. It was also about cultural exchange and economic opportunity. As Islam spread, the Bedouins adopted new religious practices while maintaining their distinct cultural identity. The caliphs, in turn, relied on the Bedouins to keep trade routes open and secure, a mutually beneficial arrangement that lasted for centuries. Now, let's fast forward again to the time of the Ottoman Empire, a sprawling dominion that stretched from Europe to the Middle East. The Ottomans were the new kids on the block, and they understood the value of keeping the Bedouins on their side. They granted them autonomy in exchange for loyalty, a shrewd move that allowed the Ottomans to maintain control over the Arabian Peninsula without having to station a garrison every few miles. But don't get too comfortable, because Bedouin-Ottoman relations were anything but smooth sailing. The Bedouins were fiercely independent, and their loyalty could be as fickle as a desert wind. When the Ottomans imposed heavy taxes or tried to restrict Bedouin trade, tensions flared, leading to skirmishes and rebellions. The Bedouins were adept at guerrilla warfare, using their knowledge of the terrain to outmaneuver Ottoman forces. It was a classic David and Goliath scenario, with the Bedouins playing the role of the scrappy underdog. In the grand chessboard of Middle Eastern politics, the Bedouins were both pawns and power players. Their strategic alliances with empires like the Romans, the Caliphates, and the Ottomans highlight their role as key influences in the region. They were the ultimate survivors, adapting to changing political landscapes with a savvy that belied their nomadic lifestyle. Debunking the myth of the isolated nomad reveals a complex tapestry of politics, trade, and culture. The Bedouins weren't just wandering the desert aimlessly, they were active participants in the power struggles that shaped the Middle East. Their story is a testament to human adaptability and the enduring power of strategic diplomacy. As we wrap up this chapter, let's keep in mind that the Bedouins' tale is far from over. Their legacy continues to influence the modern Middle East, a region still defined by shifting alliances and complex political dynamics. So, as we ride off into the sunset of this segment, remember that the Bedouins were more than just desert wanderers. They were the architects of their own destiny, one alliance at a time. And like the sands of the desert, this story is ever-changing. So, stay tuned, because the next part of our journey promises even more revelations about the Bedouins' enduring impact on history. As the sands of time continue to shift, so too do the lives of the Bedouins, who now find themselves at a crossroads between tradition and modernity. Gone are the days when the desert was merely a backdrop for their nomadic journeys. Today, it's a battleground where age-old customs meet the relentless march of progress. Let's dive into how these desert dwellers are navigating the complex realities of the 21st century, one dune at a time. First, let's talk numbers. According to a 2019 estimate, there are about 3 million Bedouins scattered across the Middle East, with significant populations in countries like Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Israel. But unlike their ancestors, most are no longer living the traditional nomadic lifestyle. A staggering 80% of Bedouins have settled in urban or semi-urban areas, a shift driven by various factors like government policies, economic opportunities, and the harsh realities of desert life. It's like trading in a camel for a compact car, not as romantic, but a lot more practical for commuting to a day job. For many Bedouins, the transition from nomadism to urban life has been anything but smooth. Governments have often pressured or incentivized them to settle, viewing their nomadic ways as outdated or impractical. In Israel, for example, the government has established planned townships to centralize the Bedouin population, offering modern amenities like schools and healthcare. Sounds great, right? But the catch is that these townships often lack infrastructure and economic opportunities, leaving many Bedouins feeling like they've traded one set of hardships for another. It's as if someone promised you a mansion and handed you a fixer-upper instead. Then there's the issue of land rights, a thorny subject that would make even a seasoned lawyer wince. Many Bedouins have faced the loss of traditional grazing lands, either through government appropriation or encroaching urban development. In Jordan, land disputes have sometimes erupted into full-blown conflicts as Bedouins find their ancestral territories being swallowed by expanding cities and farms. The romantic image of a desert wanderer free to roam wherever the wind takes them? More like a landlord-tenant dispute with Mother Nature as the silent third party. Despite these challenges, the Bedouins have shown remarkable resilience. In Saudi Arabia, some have taken advantage of the country's Vision 2030 initiative, which aims to diversify the economy beyond oil. Bedouins are increasingly engaging in tourism, offering guided desert tours, camel rides, and cultural experiences that allow visitors to step into their world, albeit temporarily. It's a clever pivot, turning what was once a necessity into a marketable skill. You could say they're the original Airbnb hosts, offering a slice of desert life with a side of mint tea. But let's not gloss over the cultural implications of this transition. As the Bedouins adapt to modern life, there's a real risk of losing their rich cultural heritage. Oral traditions, poetry, and even the Arabic language itself are under threat as younger generations gravitate towards globalized digital lifestyles. It's a paradox. In embracing the future, they risk leaving the past behind. The Bedouins are acutely aware of this, and many are taking steps to preserve their culture, using modern technology to document and share their traditions. Think of it as a digital time capsule, ensuring that their stories endure even as the sands shift beneath their feet. Now, let's tackle the elephant in the room, or should I say, the camel in the room. The romanticized image of the Bedouin as a noble, solitary desert wanderer continues to captivate imaginations worldwide. But like all myths, this one is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it draws attention to their unique way of life, sparking interest and even empathy. On the other, it oversimplifies their existence, reducing a complex, multifaceted culture to a mere caricature. It's like judging a book by its cover, a cover that's been airbrushed and Instagram filtered to oblivion. So, where does that leave us? The Bedouins are more than relics of a bygone era. They are living, breathing testaments to human adaptability and ingenuity. Their story is a reminder that identity is not static, but a dynamic interplay between past and present, tradition and innovation. They are the bridge between two worlds, navigating the choppy waters of change with a grace that belies the challenges they face. As we draw this narrative to a close, let's not consign the Bedouins to the annals of history just yet. Their legacy continues to shape the Middle East, influencing everything from cultural identity to national policies. They are the unsung heroes of the desert, their stories echoing through the sands like a timeless melody. So next time you gaze at a desert landscape, remember, it's not just a sea of sand, but a canvas painted with the stories of those who dared to call it home. In the end, the Bedouins teach us an invaluable lesson, that survival isn't just about weathering the storm, but about dancing in the rain, even if it's a metaphorical downpour in a parched desert. And as long as there are stories to tell, the Bedouins will continue to inspire, reminding us all that the journey is just as important as the destination. A time-traveling drone would capture the Etruscans, emerging from the mists of pre-Roman Italy like characters from a sepia-toned Instagram story. It's roughly 800 BC, and these enigmatic folks are settling into city-states across what we modern map enthusiasts call Tuscany, Lazio, and Umbria. Their origins? As mysterious as the allure of an overpriced avocado toast. Scholars debate whether the Etruscans were homegrown Italians or migrants with a penchant for dramatic entrances, sailing in from the east. Herodotus, that ancient gossip columnist, once claimed they hailed from Lydia, but honestly, who knows? Their DNA is as elusive as a lost sock in a Roman bathhouse. Now, let's zoom in on the social ladder of these early Italians, a hierarchy as intricate as a hipster coffee menu. At the top, we've got the aristocracy, the real MVPs of the Etruscan world. These were the folks who could throw a feast that would make even the most seasoned food blogger weep with envy. But don't be fooled, their feasts weren't just about stuffing their faces with delicacies like dormice or honey-soaked pastries. Oh no, these meals were power plays, social media before social media was cool. They were statements, declarations of wealth, influence, and, let's face it, a bit of "I'm richer than you" flair. The Etruscan elite lived in a world where feasting was practically an art form. Think of a modern banquet. Toss in some ceremonial wine guzzling, add a dash of political manoeuvring, and voila! You've got an Etruscan dinner party. These events were about who you knew, how you dressed, and how many bronze cauldrons you could cram into a single dining room. They were like the Met Gala, but with more togas and fewer selfies. Speaking of fashion, the Etruscan aristocrats rocked some serious style. Picture them draped in finely spun linen, accented with gold jewelry that would put a modern pop star's bling to shame. Their sartorial choices screamed sophistication, a visual reminder of their status, and boy did they love their bling gold, silver, bronze. We're talking about a civilization that invented the ancient arm party. Now, while the aristocracy was busy feasting and flexing, the rest of the Etruscan society was getting on with the business of daily life. The social structure was stratified, with artisans, merchants, and farmers forming the backbone of the economy. These folks were the unsung heroes who kept the wheels of the Etruscan world turning, trading goods, crafting pottery, and working the land. They might not have been dining on peacock tongues, but they were crucial to the Etruscan machine. The Etruscans were also quite the builders, setting the stage for a future Roman Empire with their city planning and architecture. They constructed cities with a precision that would make a Swiss watchmaker nod in approval. Their towns were fortified with walls and dotted with temples that paid homage to their gods, a divine lineup featuring deities like Tinia, Uni, and Minvar. These weren't just places of worship. They were symbols of civic pride and political power, as much about earthly matters as heavenly ones. But let's not romanticize too much. The Etruscans also had their fair share of internal squabbles and external threats. Their city-states often bickered like siblings over a toy, and they weren't immune to the looming presence of Rome, that ravenous neighbour with a penchant for conquest. Still, for now, let's bask in the glow of their feasts, where power and pleasure intertwined in a dance as intricate as an Etruscan fresco. In this world of opulence and elegance, the Etruscan aristocracy crafted a lifestyle that was as much about appearances as it was about sustenance. They dined not just to eat, but to display their wealth and sophistication, to reinforce their place in the social hierarchy. For them, a feast was more than a meal. It was an event, a spectacle, a way to wield influence as effectively as any sword or shield. And while the rest of the world might have been content with a simple meal of bread and cheese, the Etruscans were busy setting the table for a civilization that would leave an indelible mark on history. So buckle up, because this is just the appetizer. The main course? That's where things really get interesting. And speaking of appetites, let's dive fork first into the culinary world of the Etruscans, a civilization that put the feast in feast your eyes. Their banquets were as much about visual opulence as they were about tantalizing taste buds. So, what exactly did an Etruscan menu look like? Let's just say, if calories were counted back then, they'd need an abacus the size of a chariot. First up, the protein parade. The Etruscans loved their roasted meats, and we're talking about everything from the humble pig to the more exotic game. Venison, boar, and even the occasional hare made their way onto the dining tables, often seasoned with a variety of herbs that would make any modern-day chef nod in appreciation. It was a carnivore's paradise, a prehistoric precursor to the barbecue, only with more togas and fewer grudgingly invited neighbours. Now, these folks didn't just slack meat on the table and call it a day. Oh no, they were culinary artists. The meats were often marinated in wine and herbs, then roasted to perfection. Imagine the aroma wafting through the room, a tantalizing blend of rosemary, thyme, and oregano mingling with the rich scent of roasting meat. This wasn't just food, it was an experience, a multi-sensory indulgence that would make even the most dedicated salad enthusiast reconsider their life choices. But the Etruscans didn't stop at meat. They had a serious sweet tooth, indulging in desserts that would make a modern pastry chef reconsider their career. Honey was a staple, drizzling its golden goodness over everything from cakes to fruits. There's a recipe for mousse d'aceille, a sort of proto-cake made with must, the fresh juice of pressed grapes, flour, and, of course, honey. It was like biting into a slice of ambrosia, with each sweet morsel whispering promises of decadence and delight. Now, let's talk about the Etruscans' liquid love affair. Wine. These folks didn't just drink wine, they practically bathed in it. Wine was a cornerstone of Etruscan feasts, a social lubricant that kept conversations flowing as freely as the libations themselves. From ceramic goblets adorned with intricate designs, the Etruscans sipped wines that ranged from local Tuscan varieties to imported Greek vintages. They had a palate for variety and weren't afraid to mix it up, literally. Mixing water with wine was common, a practice that would make a sommelier's monocle pop right off today. Wine wasn't just about getting merry, though it certainly helped. It was a reflection of the Etruscans' extensive trade networks and agricultural prowess. Vineyards dotted the Etruscan landscape, a testament to their agricultural expertise and the fertile lands they inhabited. Their love of wine signaled more than just a penchant for partying. It was a symbol of economic strength and cultural exchange. The trade routes that brought exotic wines also brought ideas, technology, and culture, weaving a tapestry of connections that enriched Etruscan society. Now, you might be wondering, just how much did it cost to throw one of these lavish banquets? The answer is, a lot. Hosting a feast like this wasn't a casual affair, it was a significant investment, a tangible demonstration of wealth and social standing. The cost of the food, the wine, the entertainment, it all added up. And who footed the bill? The aristocrats, of course. These were the folks with the means to spend lavishly, and they did so with gusto, knowing that a well-thrown banquet could elevate their status and secure their influence. Feasts were also opportunities for political maneuvering, a chance to schmooze with fellow elites and forge alliances over a shared love of roasted boar and honey cakes. In a way, these banquets were the original networking events, minus the awkward small talk about the weather. Instead, there were discussions about trade agreements, land deals, and maybe a little gossip about who was wearing the latest linen toga from Etruria's finest weavers. But let's not get swept away in the romance of it all. Behind the scenes, the logistics were as complex as any modern-day event planning nightmare. Procuring the finest ingredients, ensuring the wine was perfectly aged, organizing entertainment, all of this required a small army of servants and slaves working tirelessly to make the magic happen. The reality was a stark contrast to the glamour of the dining room, a reminder of the societal hierarchies and labor that supported Etruscan opulence. And while the aristocrats indulged, what about the everyday Etruscans? Well, they were probably just grateful for leftovers. The social divide was as clear as a well-distilled wine, and while the upper classes dined on delicacies, the rest nibbled on more modest fare. Bread, olives, and the occasional sausage were the staples for the average Etruscan, a diet more about sustenance than spectacle. So, as we marvel at the Etruscans' gastronomic achievements, let's not forget the economic and social realities that underpinned these feasts. These were events that showcased not just the flavors of Etruria, but the intricate web of trade, agriculture, and social hierarchy that defined their world. It was a civilization where food was more than just sustenance. It was a statement, a celebration, and sometimes a subtle reminder of who held the power. Stay tuned, because this is just the entree. There's a whole banquet of Etruscan history waiting to be uncovered, and trust me, we're just getting started. But don't loosen your togas just yet, folks, because there's a whole other layer to these Etruscan feasts that's juicier than a well-marinated boar. While the surface seemed all about flexing wealth and social prowess, beneath it lay a profound cultural and religious tapestry. These gatherings were less about hedonistic indulgence and more about a strategic dance with the divine. Enter the Etruscan gods, a pantheon that probably had more drama than a reality TV show. Tinia, Uni, and Menriva, names that might not roll off the tongue today, but back then These deities were VIPs at every banquet. Feasting was a religious ritual, with each bite and sip almost a prayer in itself. This wasn't just about satisfying earthly appetites, it was about currying favor with the gods. You see, for the Etruscans, the dining room doubled as a celestial stage where they could perform their piety. Now, if you think this sounds like an excuse to party in the name of religion, you're only half right. Sure, they knew how to throw down a legendary feast, but there was an order, literally. Rituals were meticulously planned, omens were observed, even the seating arrangements could be a matter of divine consequence. You didn't just plop down anywhere, your spot at the table might be determined by the god's will, or at least a priest's interpretation of it. Speaking of priests, these guys were the real influences of the Etruscan world. They were intermediaries between the mortal and the divine, the ones who could interpret the celestial thumbs up or down on your latest business venture or political alliance. The feasts were a prime arena for these religious figures to flex their interpretive muscles, using everything from the pattern of wine spills to the direction of smoke to divine the gods' opinions. And let's not forget the entertainment, which was as essential as the food itself. Imagine a mix of live music, acrobatics, and yes, even a bit of drama. The Etruscans loved a good show, and their entertainers were the rock stars of the ancient world. Musicians would play lyres and double pipes, their melodies weaving through the air like an Instagram filter over reality. Acrobats would perform feats of flexibility that would make a yoga instructor wince. This wasn't just mindless fun, it was a carefully curated spectacle, a testament to the host's sophistication and connections. Now, let's debunk a myth that's as persistent as a pop-up ad. The Etruscan feast is a wild, unchecked orgy of excess. Sure, there was indulgence, but it was far from chaotic. These events were as orchestrated as a military campaign. Hosts had to balance the line between luxury and propriety, ensuring that their displays of wealth didn't tip into vulgarity. A misstep could turn a social triumph into a scandal faster than you can say scandalum. And speaking of strategy, let's talk seating arrangements. Who you sat next to could make or break alliances. It's like a high-stakes game of musical chairs, where the music never stops, but the consequences are real. You didn't park your chariot next to just anyone, proximity to power was everything. One wrong seat, and you might find yourself ousted from the inner circle faster than a jester's punchline. The economic implications of these gatherings were also significant. Think of the feasts as the ancient equivalent of a venture capital pitch, only with more wine and less PowerPoint. A successful banquet could secure loans, forge trade agreements, and even inspire military alliances. It was about leveraging social capital for tangible gains, a reminder that even in ancient times it wasn't just what you knew, but who you knew. But let's not paint an entirely rosy picture. Behind the grandeur there was a harsh reality. These feasts were expensive, like sell the family olive grove expensive. The aristocrats who hosted these events often did so by leveraging their estates and resources. The pressure to maintain appearances was relentless, and the financial strain could be devastating. Quite a few Etruscan elites found themselves in debt, their lavish lifestyles ultimately unsustainable. And while the upper crust feasted, the everyday Etruscan wasn't exactly eating cake. For them, the feasts were a distant spectacle, a world apart from their daily grind. The social divide was as stark as a fresco against a bare wall, a reminder of the societal hierarchies that structured Etruscan life. The average citizen's involvement in these events was often as a servant or labourer, the unsung forces who made the magic happen but rarely got to partake in it. In this dance of divine homage and social strategy, the Etruscan feasts were far more than mere indulgence. They were a microcosm of a society deeply intertwined with its gods, its politics, and its people. They show us a civilization that understood the power of spectacle, the art of negotiation, and the importance of a well-curated guest list. So, as we dig deeper into this ancient world, remember, the Etruscans weren't just partying. They were playing a game of high stakes and higher beliefs, where every feast was a performance, a prayer, and a proclamation. And in the grand tapestry of history, these feasts remind us that while the menus may have changed, the timeless blend of power, politics, and performance remains as intoxicating as ever. Keep those goblets ready, because the story doesn't end here. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the mysteries of the Etruscans, one course at a time. So, As we dig deeper into this ancient world, remember, the Etruscans weren't just partying. They were playing a game of high stakes and higher beliefs, where every feast was a performance, a prayer, and a proclamation. And in the grand tapestry of history, these feasts remind us that, while the menus may have changed, the timeless blend of power, politics, and performance remains as intoxicating as ever. Keep those goblets ready, because the story doesn't end here. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the mysteries of the Etruscans one course at a time. Now, as we mosey on down the Etruscan banquet table, let's turn our gaze to the real power players behind these culinary carnivals. Forget the Michelin stars. These folks were after political stars, aiming to align their fortunes with the right celestial bodies, or at least the right human ones. The Etruscan elite wielded their feasts like a conductor's baton, orchestrating alliances and rivalries with each course served. First, let's clear the air about the so-called gentlemen's club of ancient politics. Women weren't just warming the stone benches at these gatherings. They were key players in this gastronomic game of thrones. That's right, Etruscan women had a seat at the table, sometimes quite literally, and their roles weren't limited to pouring the wine. These formidable ladies were the original power influencers, using their status and wit to sway decisions and build alliances. Take Tranquil, for example. She wasn't just any woman, she was an Etruscan queen who knew how to leverage a feast for political gain. Now, Tranquil didn't just sit idly by while the men talked shop. She was busy orchestrating her husband, Tarquinius Priscus's rise to power in Rome, using her cunning and wisdom to smooth over political tensions with a well-timed dinner or two. Talk about dining diplomacy. But why were these feasts such a big deal, you ask? Well, imagine them as the ancient equivalent of a United Nations gala, only with more grape leaves and fewer translation headsets. Every guest, every morsel, every goblet of wine was a chess piece in a grand strategic game. A successful feast could be the difference between an alliance with your neighbor or a skirmish over who left their chariot parked in the wrong field. And let's not forget the seating arrangements, a veritable minefield of social politics. Where you sat could determine your current political standing or, in some cases, your future. Sitting next to a key ally could solidify your pact over roasted boar, while a spot near the exit might indicate you're on the outs. It was a high-stakes game of musical chairs, where the only thing more important than where you sat was who you sat with. The Etruscan aristocrats were nothing if not meticulous, using every detail of the feast to assert dominance and reinforce hierarchies. Think place cards, but carved into wood and backed by divine favor. Seating wasn't just about comfort. It was a statement of power, a subtle yet potent form of social control. Now, let's talk numbers. You might be wondering how much it cost to throw one of these strategic shindigs. Well, consider this. Hosting a feast could set an aristocrat back a cool 1,000 sesterces, a sum that could buy you a pretty decent villa back in the day. It was a gamble, a high-risk investment where the returns could be political alliances or, if you were unlucky, a pile of unpaid loans. Not exactly a risk-free venture for those trying to climb the social ladder or maintain their spot at the top. But the payoff could be enormous. A well-executed feast could stabilize a shaky alliance or even deter a potential invasion. It was a living testament to the host's wealth, power, and, crucially, their ability to handle the political pressures of the time. The feasts were less about indulgence and more about influence, with every toast a potential treaty, every dish a diplomatic overture. Yet, behind the glitz and glamour, there was a darker side to these banquets. The pressure to maintain appearances was immense, and the financial strain often led to ruin. Some aristocrats found themselves in debt, their estates mortgaged to finance yet another lavish event. It was a precarious balancing act, a constant dance on a tightrope where one misstep could lead to social and financial oblivion. So, as we marvel at the Etruscans' culinary politics, let's not forget the stark realities that underpinned their feasts. These were events that showcased not just their taste for luxury, but also their acumen for political maneuvering. The feasts were a microcosm of a society where power was as much about perception as it was about reality, where the line between ally and adversary was as fluid as the wine in their goblets. And let's not forget the role of entertainment in this elaborate dance. Musicians, dancers, and jesters were more than just background noise. They were integral to the feast's success. A well-timed jest, or a haunting melody could sway a guest's mood, making them more amenable to a proposal or less likely to notice a slight. Entertainment was the oil that kept the wheels of diplomacy turning smoothly, a crucial element in the delicate art of Etruscan feasting. As we approach the climax of our exploration, remember that these feasts were more than just meals. They were a theatre where the drama of politics played out, where each course was a scene, each toast a line of dialogue in a complex script. The Etruscans understood the power of spectacle, and they wielded it with a deft hand, turning every feast into an opportunity for political gain. So keep your togas securely fastened, because the story of the Etruscan feasts is far from over. There's plenty more drama, intrigue, and, yes, a few more goblets of wine to come as we continue to uncover the secrets of this fascinating civilization. Stay tuned for the next chapter, where we'll dive even deeper into the world of Etruscan politics, one tantalizing dish at a time. As we prepare to bid adieu to the Etruscan feasts, let's delve into their decline as Rome's shadow loomed larger than a toga on laundry day. The Etruscans, once the reigning culinary and political powerhouses of Italy, found themselves gradually outmaneuvered by the Romans. You see, Rome wasn't just a city with a penchant for annexation, it was a cultural sponge, absorbing and adapting the best bits from its neighbours. And boy did they take notes from the Etruscans. At its peak, Etruscan society was as rich and flavourful as a well-aged cheese, but by the late 4th century BC, the rise of Rome began to curdle their way of life. The Etruscan city-states, with their penchant for sibling-like squabbles, were no match for Rome's united front. Rome expanded its influence like an overzealous barista pouring a cappuccino, and the Etruscans were swept up in the frothy conquest. By 264 BC, Etruria was firmly under Roman control, and with it the elaborate feasting culture started to crumble like a neglected biscotti. Now, the feasting didn't stop overnight. Rome wasn't about to throw out the culinary baby with the bathwater. No, the Romans were savvy diners. They cherry-picked the best Etruscan traditions, infusing them into their own ever-evolving culture. Take the Roman convivium, for example. This was no mere dinner party. It was a descendant of Etruscan banquets, complete with reclining diners and copious amounts of wine. Yet it came with a Roman twist, more structured and, unsurprisingly, more political. The Etruscans might have been absorbed into the Roman machine, but their legacy lived on through these culinary customs. It's like when your favorite indie band sells out to the mainstream. Sure, the vibe changes, but you can still hear the original riffs if you listen closely. Roman feasts adopted the Etruscan flair for elaborate meals, intricate utensils, and the all-important social stratification that made every meal a strategic affair. But let's not romanticize this transition too much. The reality was that many Etruscan aristocrats found themselves stripped of their status faster than a toga at a toga party. The Roman assimilation wasn't all about culinary harmony, it was also about power dynamics. The Etruscan elite faced a hard choice: adapt or become irrelevant. Many chose the former, blending into Roman society, their cultural contributions eventually merging into the Roman identity like sugar into a pot of simmering wine. Economically, the shift was seismic. The Etruscan economy, once a robust network of trade and agriculture, had to adjust to the centralized Roman system. Taxes, tributes, and land redistribution were the new order of the day, and not everyone came out a winner. The Etruscans who managed to keep their lands and influence found new roles within the Roman framework, while others faded into the background like yesterday's news scrolls. Despite these challenges, the culinary and social traditions of the Etruscans left an indelible mark on Roman culture. The Romans adopted the Etruscan love for wine, incorporating it into their own feasts with gusto. They even took on the Etruscan practice of divination, albeit with a Roman twist, because who doesn't love a good prophecy over dinner? And what about the enduring legacy of the Etruscans in modern Italian culture? Well, if you've ever enjoyed a leisurely Italian meal with multiple courses, you've got the Etruscans to thank. Their emphasis on dining as a communal and social event resonated through the ages, influencing the Italian approach to food and hospitality. The Italian tradition of lingering over a meal, savouring each bite and sip, is a direct descendant of the Etruscan culinary philosophy. It's as if every Italian nonna is channeling a bit of Etruscan spirit when she insists you take one more helping of pasta. So, What can we learn from the rise and fall of Etruscan feasting culture? For one, it's a testament to the power of cultural exchange and adaptation. The Etruscans may have been absorbed by Rome, but their influence lived on, shaping the culinary and social landscapes of their conquerors. It's a reminder that even in the face of change, traditions can endure, morphing and evolving like a recipe passed down through generations. In the end, the story of the Etruscan feasts is as complex and layered as a well-crafted lasagna. It's about power, politics, and the enduring human desire to gather around a table and share a meal. So, next time you sit down to a sumptuous dinner, raise a glass to the Etruscans, pioneers of the banquet, masters of the feast, and unsung architects of the Italian culinary legacy, because in the grand tapestry of history, their story is one that continues to flavor our lives today. And with that, our journey through the Etruscan banquet halls comes to a close, leaving us with a full heart, a mind brimming with history, and perhaps a slightly growling stomach. Bon appétit! As dawn's first light spills over the Nile's sleepy waters, your day as a 3rd century BC Egyptian noblewoman begins. You've got the good life, or at least the ancient version of it. Let's just say, if Instagram had existed, you'd be all over it with your collection of wigs and kohl. Your morning starts with a splash. Not into the Nile, mind you, but into a bath filled with perfumes and oils as fragrant as an ancient TikTok influencer's unboxing video. You're attended by a small army of servants whose sole duty is to ensure your skin is smoother than a pyramid's side. Cleopatra gets all the credit, but trust me, you were setting trends long before she even stepped into her first Roman toga. As you wrap yourself in linen finer than anything your average pyramid laborer could dream of, you consider the first order of business: breakfast. Forget cereal. You're diving into a spread of bread, honey, and figs. Your kitchen staff, whose salaries would make a modern barista weep, ensure your table is always brimming with the best produce Egypt's fertile lands can offer. Each meal is a small fortune. Wheat doesn't come cheap when you're looking at 200 drachmas per year just to keep your pantry stocked. But hey, you've got to keep up appearances, right? Speaking of appearances, your wardrobe alone could bankrupt a small kingdom. It's not just about throwing on any old linen dress. No, your attire is an elaborate statement wrapped in layers of meticulously pleated fabric, dyed with colors that say, I can afford a dye job more costly than your house. Indigo and madder red are your go-to choices, as they cost a pretty penny, around 50 drachmas per piece. Each day you select your outfit as carefully as a modern influencer picks a filter. After all, fashion is your second language, and you're fluent. But let's not forget the real accessory, your jewelry. Gold, lapis lazuli, and carnelian adorn your neck and wrists, each piece telling a story of wealth and power. A single necklace could fetch enough to buy an estate in the countryside. You might not have a LinkedIn profile, but your connections are displayed for all to see in every glint and sparkle. And don't even get me started on the wigs, crafted from human hair and styled to within an inch of their lives. They're the ancient world's version of a designer label. With your morning routine complete, it's time to face the day's social obligations, because being a noblewoman isn't just about lounging around like a sunbathing crocodile. You're expected to mingle, network, and influence. Your social calendar is busier than a modern-day celebrity's, filled with banquets, religious ceremonies, and the occasional political maneuvering. Think of it as a never-ending episode of The Real Housewives of Thebes, where alliances shift faster than the desert winds. You glide through the grand halls of your home, which could easily be mistaken for a small palace. Built with limestone and decorated with frescoes depicting everything from mythological scenes to your family's greatest hits, these walls have seen more drama than a soap opera. You're not just a noblewoman, you're a brand, and maintaining that brand costs money, like 300 drachmas a year for upkeep alone. But don't worry, your estate's coffers are overflowing, thanks to the labor of countless workers toiling under the blazing Egyptian sun. Your influence extends beyond your household, of course. As you step into the bustling streets, you're acutely aware of the social hierarchy that governs every interaction. From the lowliest farmer to the highest official, everyone knows their place, and you've mastered the art of navigating this complex web. In a society where social standing can mean the difference between a life of luxury and one of hardship, you wield your status like a pharaoh's scepter. And then there's the matter of politics. You might not hold office, but your opinion carries weight in local matters. Whether it's advising on trade deals or mediating disputes, your voice is heard, and your decisions can ripple through the community like a stone dropped in the Nile. You're a behind-the-scenes power player, ensuring that your interests and those of your family are always protected. It's a delicate dance of diplomacy and persuasion, but you handle it with the grace of a Nile crane. As the sun dips below the horizon and the cool desert breeze sweeps through the city, you prepare for the evening's festivities. Tonight, you're hosting a banquet, a chance to showcase your wealth and influence to the elite of Egyptian society. The dining hall is a spectacle of opulence, with tables laden with food and wine, servants flitting about like bees in a hive. Each guest is a potential ally or rival, and you navigate the room with the practiced ease of a seasoned diplomat. By the time the last guest departs and the echoes of laughter fade into the night, you retreat to your private chambers, exhausted but satisfied. It's been a day filled with challenges and triumphs, a testament to your resilience and skill. You may live in a world governed by strict hierarchies and rigid traditions, but within those confines, you've carved out a life of power and prestige. As you drift off to sleep, the weight of your responsibilities momentarily forgotten, you know that tomorrow will bring new opportunities and challenges. But for now, you rest, secure in the knowledge that you are a force to be reckoned with, an Egyptian noblewoman at the height of her power. As the moon casts its silver glow over the Nile, let's dive into what really makes you tick beyond those dazzling jewels and social soirees. Your mind, a treasure trove as valuable as any golden amulet. In the Ptolemaic world, where Greek and Egyptian cultures are in a constant dance, your education is both a privilege and a tool, a sharp instrument in the toolkit of noblewomanhood. Now, don't get me wrong, this isn't your run-of-the-mill school experience with a rigid desk and pop quizzes. Think more of a curated journey through a gallery of knowledge. You're not just learning to read and write in Demotic or Greek. You're grappling with subjects that would make any modern curriculum sweat. Mathematics, philosophy, and astronomy fill your days, each lesson an investment in your future influence. You're taught to read the stars not just for celestial navigation, but as a metaphor for understanding the heavenly and earthly spheres of power. Literacy is your gateway to power, a secret handshake in the corridors of influence. About 1% of the population is literate, and in this exclusive club, you're practically royalty. Your ability to decode the scribbles on a papyrus scroll means you can correspond with far-off relatives or even the royal court itself. You might not have a smartphone, but your stylus and wax tablet are just as effective in sending messages that could alter diplomatic relations or secure a lucrative marriage. And speaking of marriage, let's not pretend it's all about love and candlelit dinners by the Nile. Marriage is 1 part romance, 9 parts strategy. Your education also includes a crash course in political science, specifically how to ensure your family's interests are as protected as the pharaoh's treasure troves. You're learning the intricacies of alliances, the art of negotiation, and the fine line between persuasion and manipulation. It's like Game of Thrones, but with more linen and fewer dragons. But don't let the allure of power fool you into thinking it's all high stakes and intrigue. There's also art, the balm for your politically frazzled soul. In a world where your public face is everything, your private moments with music, painting, or poetry are your sanctuary. You might be composing hymns to the gods in hieroglyphics, or painting with vibrant pigments derived from crushed minerals, each stroke a whisper of your inner world. Let's face it though, your art collection isn't just about personal expression. It's another way to display your wealth and sophistication, an ancient Instagram feed curated to perfection. Now, let's peel back the gilded layers and look at the political landscape you inhabit, which is more complex than a hieroglyphic crossword puzzle. Welcome to the Ptolemaic dynasty, where Greek meets Egyptian in a cultural mashup that would make any fusion restaurant proud. The Ptolemies, Macedonian Greeks who rule over Egypt, have their own set of challenges, wrestling with unruly subjects and foreign threats. The good news? As a noblewoman, you're a vital player in this drama, navigating a political minefield with the stealth of a cat in a grain storehouse. Your role often involves back-channel diplomacy, where your husband might be the face of your family's power, but you're the brains behind the scenes. You might not have a seat at the male-dominated council, but your influence is felt in the whispered conversations over wine, at banquets, or the quiet counsel you provide to your male relatives. The political arena is a dangerous game, but you've mastered the art of weighing risks and rewards, all while ensuring your family's fortunes are as stable as the pyramids. The stakes are high, and you're playing for keeps. You know that one misstep can topple the delicate balance of alliances and patronage that keep you in your luxurious bubble. But here's the kicker. Despite the high-wire act, you thrive in this environment. You're like a lotus flower, blooming in the muddy waters of political intrigue, your roots deep in the fertile soil of your education and cunning. So, there you have it. You're not just an ornament of society, but a force to be reckoned with, wielding education and art as deftly as any pharaoh's scepter. Tomorrow, you'll continue this dance, balancing cultural expectations with personal ambition, all while maintaining that enigmatic smile that hides a mind as sharp as a pyramid's edge. But for now, let the stars be your lullaby, and know that in this world of ancient wonders, you're the true marvel. As you drift off to sleep beneath the glow of the Egyptian moon, it's tempting to think your life is all about shimmering jewels and the kind of opulence that would make even the Kardashians blush. But here's the kicker. That glittering image of your life as an exotic Egyptian noblewoman. It's more myth than reality, a narrative that's been polished smoother than the Sphinx's limestone. Let's dig into the gritty truth behind the glam. First off, the label exotics is a bit of a misnomer. Sure, your culture is a blend of Greek and Egyptian influences, a veritable ancient smoothie of traditions. But rather than lounging around like a timeless Cleopatra prototype, your life is a constant juggling act. Forget the romanticized image of lounging on a gilded chaise, sipping fermented date wine as servants fan you with palm leaves. You've got responsibilities that rival those of a corporate CEO, minus the stock options. Let's get into some specifics. You're navigating a society where women, even of noble standing, are not as free as those hieroglyphs might suggest. Yes, some of your contemporaries, like the formidable Arsinoe's second queen, co-ruler and sister-wife to Ptolemy II, defied gender norms, wielding power like a pro. Arsinoe's influence in military and political affairs was legendary, and her portrait-adorned coins, a not-so-subtle flex of her status. But for most noblewomen, power was more of a whisper than a roar. While the legends speak of empowerment, the reality often involved being a pawn in the dynastic chess game. Marriages were strategic alliances, not fairy tales. You might find yourself wed to a distant cousin, or even a much older official, to cement family ties and boost political leverage. It's like being on The Bachelor, but with fewer roses and more papyrus contracts. And while we're busting myths, let's talk about your daily grind. Behind the silks and gold, there's the harsh reality of managing estates and overseeing the work of countless labourers. It's your job to ensure the grain stores are full and the taxes are paid, a balancing act that would leave any modern spreadsheet trembling. Economic stability is your lifeline, with annual estate income often reaching a hefty 2,000 drachmas. But remember, with great wealth comes great bureaucracy. Now, about those servants, yes, you have them, but they're not just there for idle chatter or fetching the latest scroll from the library. They're an essential part of running your household, skilled workers in a complex hierarchy of their own. Each servant has a role, from the steward managing accounts to the maid responsible for your wardrobe's upkeep. In a way, it's like managing a small business, with you as the CEO who must ensure that everything runs smoother than a Nile cruise. And then there are the societal constraints that wrap around your freedom like a tightly wound linen shroud. The Ptolemaic society is a patchwork of Greek and Egyptian laws, meaning your rights depend on which legal system you're dealing with. Under Egyptian law, you might own property and initiate divorce, but under Greek influence, those freedoms could be more restricted. It's a legal labyrinth that would give even a seasoned lawyer a headache. But let's not ignore the allure of the myth. The idea of an exotic noblewoman draped in luxury and mystery is as captivating today as it was in antiquity. It's the stuff of legends and Hollywood blockbusters. Cleopatra, for example, has been immortalized as both a seductress and a shrewd politician, though the truth lies somewhere in between. While she was indeed a political powerhouse, her portrayal often skews towards sensationalism, a narrative crafted more by the pens of Roman historians than by the sands of Egyptian reality. In the end, your life is a tapestry woven with threads of myth and truth, each as colourful as the next. You're a master of adaptation, navigating a world where appearances can be as deceptive as the mirage on a desert horizon. Tomorrow, the sun will rise over the Nile, and with it, new opportunities and challenges will emerge. But tonight, as you rest, remember, you're not just a figure in the storied past, you're a force of nature, as real and enduring as the pyramids themselves. And isn't that a legacy worth its weight in gold? Yet before we get too swept up in the idea of you as some kind of ancient girl boss, let's pause and dive headfirst into the economic whirlpool of 3rd century BC Egypt. Trust me, it's as complex as a pyramid blueprint and just as foundational to understanding your life as an Egyptian noblewoman. First off, let's set the scene. Picture Egypt as the Silicon Valley of the ancient world, except instead of tech startups, it's all about agriculture. The Nile River is the lifeline here, and it's not just for aesthetics or Instagram-worthy sunsets. This river is the powerhouse behind Egypt's agricultural economy, flooding predictably every year and leaving behind rich, fertile silt. It's like nature's version of Miracle Grow, and it's why Egypt is the breadbasket of the ancient Mediterranean world. We're talking about a grain surplus so substantial that it could feed not just your household, but entire empires. And if you think that sounds like a lot of responsibility, you're right. As a noblewoman, you're not just lounging around in luxurious linens, you're overseeing these agricultural operations. Your estate is a mini-economy, producing wheat, barley, flax and papyrus, because apparently everyone needs a good papyrus scroll now and then. You've got a workforce that could rival a small army, all responsible for keeping this agricultural machine running smoothly. The stakes are high, and so are the taxes. The Ptolemaic rulers have a penchant for squeezing every last drop of revenue from their subjects, including you. We're talking tax rates that could reach up to 20% of your harvest. Ouch. Now, let's talk trade. Egypt's strategic location is like owning Boardwalk in a game of Monopoly. You're at the crossroads of Africa, Asia, and Europe, making Egypt a bustling hub of trade routes. You've got goods flowing in from the Red Sea, the Mediterranean, and overland caravans. Everything from gold and ivory to spices and textiles passes through your borders. And let's not forget the most precious commodity of all, grain. Your grain is gold in a time before refrigeration and processed foods. It's being shipped off to feed the masses in Rome and Athens, making you a key player in international trade, even if indirectly. But being part of this economic engine isn't just about wealth, it's also about pressure. As a noble family, you face constant economic expectations that make modern-day keeping up with the Joneses look like a walk in the park. Dowries and inheritance play a significant role here. When you get married, your family is expected to provide a dowry that can range from 2,000 to 3,000 drachmas, a small fortune. This isn't just a nest egg, it's capital, meant to secure alliances and ensure your financial stability in marriage. And heaven forbid you try to save on this. Skimping on a dowry is like showing up to a red carpet event in last season's fashion. Inheritance laws add another layer of complexity. Land and wealth are typically passed down through the male line, but there are exceptions. Women can inherit, especially if there are no male heirs, but this usually comes with strings attached, often requiring you to marry within the family to keep the wealth consolidated. It's like being caught in a never-ending episode of Succession, where every move is scrutinized for its potential impact on family fortunes. All these economic pressures trickle down to influence societal structures and gender roles. On one hand, as a noblewoman, you have more autonomy and responsibility than most, managing estates and influencing trade. On the other, you're still operating within a patriarchal framework that limits your freedoms and dictates your choices. The myth of the all-powerful noblewoman is alluring, but the reality is more nuanced, a dance between power and constraint. And then there's the broader society to consider. While you're navigating these high-stakes economic waters, the majority of Egypt's population is working the land, paying taxes, and making ends meet. The social hierarchy is as rigid as a limestone obelisk, and mobility is limited. Your power and privilege rest on the labor of those beneath you in the social order, a sobering reminder that every bright jewel has its shadow. In the end, the economic landscape of 3rd century BC, Egypt is a complex web of trade, agriculture, and social obligations, all intertwined with the threads of power and gender. It's a world where every decision has consequences, where wealth is as much a burden as it is a blessing. And as you navigate these currents, remember that while myths may paint you as a figure of exotic allure, the reality is far more grounded and just as fascinating. So, as the Nile flows ever onward, so too does your journey, weaving through the tapestry of history, leaving a legacy as enduring as the sands of Egypt itself. So, as the Nile continues its eternal journey, let's pivot to the legacy of Egyptian noblewomen, a topic as rich and layered as a pharaoh's tomb. These women were more than just footnotes in the grand scroll of history. They were the architects of influence, weaving their own narratives into the fabric of Egyptian society. It's time to unpack how their contributions have echoed through the ages and shaped the way we perceive ancient Egypt today. First, let's address the elephant in the room, Cleopatra. Cleopatra. Arguably the most famous Egyptian queen whose life has been immortalized in countless films, books, and, let's face it, the occasional pop song. But here's the kicker. Cleopatra was actually Greek, a descendant of Ptolemy I, one of Alexander the Great's generals. Her tale is a classic case of myth overshadowing reality. While the romanticized version paints her as a seductress who brought Rome to its knees, the truth is she was a shrewd politician and linguist who spoke 9 languages. Her real power lay in her diplomacy and her ability to play political chess with the big boys of Rome. Cleopatra's story is a microcosm of how Egyptian noblewomen have been both remembered and misremembered. The allure of the exotic often clouds our understanding, turning complex historical figures into one-dimensional caricatures. It's like trying to understand a hieroglyph with only a fraction of the symbols. You're missing a big part of the story. But let's zoom out from Cleopatra and consider the broader canvas. Noblewomen in ancient Egypt wielded power in ways that were subtle yet profound. They were patrons of the arts, initiators of religious rituals, and key players in the household economy. In a society where the divine was woven into the everyday, their roles in temples and religious ceremonies were not just spiritual, but also political. Think of them as the original influences, shaping public opinion and societal norms with every ritual they performed. Take, for instance, Queen Hatshepsut, who ruled as pharaoh in her own right. She defied gender norms by donning the false beard of kingship, a symbolic gesture that signaled her authority in a male-dominated realm. Her reign was marked by significant architectural achievements, including the construction of her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri. This wasn't just a vanity project, it was a testament to her vision of Egypt as a powerful and prosperous kingdom. Yet her legacy was almost erased by successors who couldn't stomach the idea of a female pharaoh. Her monuments were defaced, her name chiseled out. An ancient example of cancel culture, if you will. The contributions of these women weren't limited to politics and religion. They were also economic powerhouses, managing estates and ensuring the prosperity of their households. Their ability to navigate the complexities of inheritance laws and estate management was a testament to their acumen. In a world where economic stability was as fragile as a papyrus scroll, their skills were not just valuable, they were essential. But why does any of this matter today? Well, understanding the legacy of Egyptian noblewomen offers us a lens through which to view the ongoing dialogue about gender roles and power dynamics. It challenges the notion that women have always been passive observers in history, relegated to the sidelines while men called the shots. These women were far more than the sum of their titles. They were strategists, diplomats, and economic managers. Their stories remind us that history is a tapestry of voices, some loud, some whispering through the corridors of time. And then there's the myth versus reality conundrum. The romanticized image of the exotic Egyptian noblewoman, draped in gold and mystery, is undeniably captivating. It's a narrative that's been perpetuated through centuries, as seductive as it is misleading. Yet, by peeling back the layers of myth, we find a reality that's far more nuanced and, dare I say, more interesting. A world where power was negotiated behind closed doors, where alliances were forged over shared meals rather than signed treaties, and where the personal was always political. In modern times, the stories of these women resonate with the ongoing struggles and triumphs of women across the globe. The balancing act of power and perception, the dance between public image and private ambition. These are themes as relevant today as they were millennia ago. Their legacies challenge us to rethink our perceptions of history and to acknowledge the roles women have played, not just as muses or monarchs, but as architects of their own destinies. As we wrap up this historical journey, consider this. The tales of Egyptian noblewomen are not just relics of a bygone era. They are powerful reminders of the enduring complexity of human society, a testament to the fact that history is never truly written in stone. So next time you find yourself captivated by the image of an Egyptian queen, remember that her story is layered with both myth and truth, a narrative as winding as the Nile itself. And perhaps in understanding her journey, you might find new insights for your own. After all, the past is but a prologue, and its lessons are as timeless as the sands of Egypt. In the bustling city of Calcutta, 1861, a place teeming with the kind of chaos only colonial rule could inspire, a little boy named Rabindranath Tagore entered the world. If you thought your family had its quirks, let's just say the Tagores were in a league of their own. Picture a sprawling Bengali mansion filled with poets, philosophers and politicians, all under one roof. This was no ordinary household. It was a crucible of cultural and intellectual ferment, and young Rabindranath was right in the thick of it. The Tagores were essentially the Kardashians of British India, minus the reality TV, but plus a staggering amount of artistic talent. His family was deeply embedded in the social and political fabric of the time, with connections that stretched from local elites to the British establishment. The Tagores were movers and shakers, and Rabindranath was expected to follow suit. But, as it turns out, following the script was never quite his thing. Rabindranath's education was as unconventional as it gets. Think homeschooling, but make it 19th century Bengali style. Forget about monotonous school bells. His learning environment was more like Hogwarts meets an Indian ashram. Instead of textbooks, he had tutors who were instructed to let his imagination run wild. His father, Rabindranath Tagore, a leading light of the Brahmo Samaj movement, believed that rote learning was the enemy of creativity. So, young Rabindranath was encouraged to explore literature, music, and art with the kind of freedom that would make modern progressive schools look like military academies. By age 8, Rabindranath was already trying his hand at poetry, because why not? But his literary ambitions didn't stop there. He thought, why just stick to poems when you can write entire plays? So, he did just that. His early experiments in drama, performed by family members coerced into acting roles, were the stuff of family legend. Picture little Rabindranath directing his siblings and cousins in living room productions, complete with makeshift costumes and sets. The results were predictably chaotic, but undeniably charming. And then there was his brief stint in England, which was less academic pursuit and more cultural expedition. At age 17, he was packed off to Brighton for formal schooling, a decision probably made as much for prestige as for education. The British educational system was supposed to polish him up, but Rabindranath found it about as inspiring as watching paint dry. He spent 2 years in England, where his formal studies were lacklustre at best, but the experience profoundly influenced his worldview. He returned to India without a degree, but with a newfound perspective on colonialism and a solid grasp of English literature. During this period, the social and political climate in British India was a cauldron of unrest and reform. The British Empire was at its peak, but so were the tensions bubbling beneath its glossy surface. The Indian National Congress was still in its infancy, but the seeds of independence were being sown. Meanwhile, back in Calcutta, the Tagore household was a hotbed of revolutionary ideas and cultural renaissance. The family was deeply invested in the intellectual and artistic revival sweeping through Bengal, a movement that would later be known as the Bengal Renaissance. Amidst this backdrop, Rabindranath's early literary endeavours unfolded. His youthful plays may have been amateurish, but they hinted at a future brilliance that would eventually earn him the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1913. However, back then, the family probably saw them as endearing diversions rather than prophetic masterpieces. It's worth noting that the Tagores had their own ideas about British rule, which were as complex and multifaceted as the family itself. They were both beneficiaries and critics of the colonial system, enjoying its privileges while also challenging its injustices. Rabindranath, for his part, would eventually become a vocal critic of British imperialism, but in his youth he was still finding his voice amidst the cacophony of opinions that surrounded him. His early literary experiments were more than just childish antics. They were the seedlings of a creative genius that would eventually reshape Indian art and literature. If there's one thing to take away from Rabindranath's early years, it's this: genius doesn't always follow a straight path, and sometimes the most unconventional beginnings can lead to the most extraordinary outcomes. As Rabindranath Tagore's early experiments in literature hinted at future brilliance, the 1890s and early 1900s saw him transform into a writing powerhouse. If his childhood was the prologue, this was Act 1, where the plot thickens and the protagonist steps into the limelight. Tagore was not just scribbling away in a corner, he was crafting the future of Indian literature as if he had a personal vendetta against mediocrity. By the time the 1890s rolled around, Rabindranath had become a veritable factory of literary output. We're talking about a guy who could churn out poetry collections like some people produce laundry. His works during this era, like Sonar Tori, The Golden Boat, published in 1894, weren't just popular. They were seismic events in the Bengali literary world. His poetry wasn't a mere exercise in rhyme and metre, it was an exploration of the human condition, wrapped in the emotions and ethos of a colonially oppressed society. If you wanted to know what it felt like to be alive in British India, you could do worse than leaf through a Tagore anthology. But let's not romanticize this too much. Writing wasn't just a passion project for Tagore, it was also a means of keeping the lights on. The economic realities of the time were harsh, and the Tagore family wasn't immune. The family estates were experiencing financial strain, which meant that Rabindranath had to balance his poetic dreams with the cold, hard cash flow, or lack thereof. He managed the family estates in Shelida and Shahzadpur, and while the romantic image might be of a poet pondering his lines under a banyan tree, the reality was more likely a balance sheet and a bunch of tenants who needed their landlord to make some decisions. Yet, even in the midst of land management woes, Tagore's pen never stopped moving. He penned a slew of short stories, transforming the genre in Bengali literature with works like Galpagacha. His stories were not just narratives, they were dissections of societal norms, dissecting the human psyche with the precision of a surgeon who moonlights as a poet. If you wanted moral ambiguity and complex characters, Tagore delivered in spades. And then there was Shantanu Katan, his experiment in education that was as revolutionary as it was risky. Founded in 1901, the school was his antidote to the sterile, rote learning systems he so despised. His vision? A place where students learn from the world around them, not just textbooks. Think of it as a mash-up of an ashram, a liberal arts school, and a hippie commune, but with more focus on sculpting young minds and less on hacky sack. The school would eventually grow into Visva Bharati University in 1921, a place that attracted minds like Mahatma Gandhi and Albert Einstein for debates and discussions. Picture it, Einstein, with his wild hair, sparring with Gandhian philosophy over chai talk about a faculty meeting. Now, let's fast forward to 1913, the year the Nobel Prize Committee decided to shake things up a bit. Tagore won the Nobel Prize in Literature, the first non-European to do so, mind you, for his collection, Gitanjali, Song Offerings. The myth is that the Nobel Prize was a bolt from the blue, a divine recognition of unparalleled genius. Reality check, there was nothing accidental about it. Behind the scenes, Tagore's friend and admirer, W.B. Yeats, along with other European literati, had been championing his work. Talk about having friends in high places. The Nobel win wasn't just a personal triumph, it was a geopolitical event. In a world where the British Empire was still flexing its colonial muscles, Tagore's win was a symbol of intellectual parity. It was like the literary equivalent of a mic drop on the global stage. Of course, the win also came with its own set of challenges. Suddenly, everyone wanted a piece of Tagore, from publishers to politicians. Imagine going from writing in the serene surroundings of rural Bengal to dealing with the international literary paparazzi. The man who once had to negotiate with publishers just to get his works printed now had the world at his feet. But let's not forget the irony of it all. Here was a man who critiqued Western materialism and colonial dominance, now being celebrated by the very institutions he scrutinized. If that isn't a twist worthy of a Tagore short story, I don't know what is. Yet, Tagore handled it with the grace of a seasoned diplomat, using his newfound fame to promote his educational and cultural ideals. So, as we leave this chapter, Rabindranath Tagore stands at the crossroads of personal success and global recognition. His work not only reshaped Indian literature, but also forced the world to sit up and take notice. Yet, as the story continues, we'll see that the challenges of fame, economic pressure, and his unyielding ideals were far from over. Tagore's journey was just beginning, and the next act promised to be as compelling as the last. So, standing at the crossroads of global acclaim and personal ideals, Rabindranath Tagore faced the next chapter of his life with the kind of complexity that would make even the most intricate of his poems look like a nursery rhyme. Picture this. It's the early 1900s, and the Indian independence movement is heating up faster than a summer afternoon in Calcutta. Enter Mahatma Gandhi, a man whose simplicity was as strategic as a chess grandmaster's opening move. While Tagore's pen was mightier than most swords, Gandhi's spinning wheel was out to conquer an empire. Tagore and Gandhi, both giants in their own right, shared a mutual respect that was as genuine as it was complicated. They were like two sides of a coin, united in purpose but often flipping over ideology. Tagore, with his aristocratic roots and global perspective, often found Gandhi's asceticism a bit too Spartan for his tastes. Gandhi, on the other hand, admired Tagore's intellect, but saw his internationalism as a tad dilettantish. It was the classic case of the poet and the pragmatist, each trying to shape the future with their own tools. Now, Tagore's political views were as nuanced as one of his sonnets. While he supported India's quest for independence, he wasn't entirely sold on the method of non-cooperation. He once called Gandhi's approach a political asceticism, which, let's face it, sounds like the kind of thing you'd hear in a 1920s intellectual salon, complete with monocles and cigarette holders. Tagore's critique wasn't just academic. He genuinely believed that shutting out Western influences was like throwing the baby out with the colonial bathwater. As he put it, if India cuts off herself completely from the West, she will dry up. In 1919, the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, a brutal event that saw British troops kill hundreds of unarmed Indian civilians, ignited a firestorm of outrage. Tagore, no stranger to righteous indignation, renounced his knighthood in protest. This wasn't just a symbolic gesture. It was like telling the British Crown, thanks, but no thanks, with a side of, shame on you. To renounce a title was no small thing, especially when titles were the LinkedIn endorsements of their day. But Tagore, ever the idealist, wasn't about to let a little imperial recognition stand in the way of his moral compass. While Gandhi was busy knitting the fabric of resistance, Tagore took to the skies, or at least the steamships, and embarked on a series of global tours. Between 1916 and 1934, he visited over 30 countries across 5 continents, making him the cultural ambassador India never knew it needed. Japan, the United States, Argentina, and even the Soviet Union, Tagore was everywhere, like the international version of a rock star, but with more poetry and less pyrotechnics. Tagore's travels weren't just about spreading Indian culture, they were a two-way street of ideas. In Japan, he warned against rising nationalism, which was about as welcome as a polite cough in a silent room. In the United States, he critiqued the relentless pursuit of wealth, famously saying, "The civilization of the West has in its keeping the fate of the world." He was like a cultural DJ, spinning records of wisdom that resonated across different societies. But let's not get too swept away by the romance of a globe-trotting poet. Tagore's travels also had a pragmatic side. The economic backdrop of his journeys was a financial landscape as rocky as the Himalayas. Running Shantiniketan wasn't cheap, and Tagore often used his international lectures to raise funds, proving that even visionary educators need to play the capitalist game to keep the lights on. While Tagore was busy waltzing with the world, the Western society he encountered wasn't always the enlightened utopia it fancied itself to be. Tagore had a sharp eye for colonial hypocrisy, pointing out the disconnect between Western ideals of liberty and the reality of their imperial actions. During one of his lectures in Chicago, he quipped, "The West seems to have forgotten that the lamp of freedom must be kept burning in its own house for the whole world to see." His observations were as cutting as they were true, a reminder that the emperor often had no clothes, and sometimes not even a decent pair of socks. But let's not paint Tagore as just the serene poet-philosopher. Beneath the flowing robes and the sage-like beard was a man unafraid to take firm stances on social issues. He championed women's rights, criticized the caste system, and advocated for education that liberated rather than confined. His poetry and prose were more than just artistic endeavors. They were instruments for social change, crafted with the precision of a fine-tuned sitar string. Yet for all his high-minded ideals, Tagore wasn't immune to the complexities of real-world politics. His relationship with the British Crown was a tightrope walk between critique and cooperation. He opposed the partition of Bengal in 1905, a divisive move by the British that was as popular as a damp firework. Yet he also maintained dialogues with British intellectuals, believing that conversation could bridge the chasm of misunderstanding. As we leave this chapter, Tagore stands as a figure both of his time and ahead of it, a man whose pen was ever ready to challenge the status quo. His travels and political engagements were not just footnotes in a storied life. They were integral chapters in a narrative that was as much about reshaping the world as it was about understanding it. But hold on to your seats, because Tagore's journey is far from over, and the next act promises to be just as compelling. We now find Rabindranath Tagore, a man who'd seen more of the world than most armchair travellers could dream of, settling back into the rhythms of rural Bengal. It wasn't exactly a tranquil retirement, though. Oh no, Tagore was just shifting gears, not slowing down. His later years became an intricate dance between artistic evolution, social reform, and the constant juggling act of maintaining his estate. First up, Tagore the musician. Forget the idea of a poet just sticking to his quill. Tagore was a musical polymath who composed over 2,000 songs, now affectionately known as Rabindra Sangeet. These weren't your typical ditties. They were a melodic blend of classical Indian ragas and Western motifs, creating an entirely new genre. Imagine blending Beethoven with traditional Indian tunes, a fusion as audacious as mixing sushi and tacos, but somehow Tagore made it work. His compositions resonated across cultural boundaries and are still sung with fervor today. Songs like Amar Shona Bangla, which later became Bangladesh's national anthem, speak volumes of his enduring influence. Then there's Tagore, the artist. Always an innovator, he took up painting in his 60s, proving that you're never too old to reinvent yourself. His art was as unconventional as his life doodles that transformed into surreal landscapes and abstract figures. Not exactly the stuff of the Royal Academy, but compelling enough to hold exhibitions in Paris, London, and New York. It turns out, the man who could pen a soul-stirring sonnet could also wield a paintbrush with surprising dexterity. While Tagore's artistic pursuits were flourishing, the economic situation back home was about as stable as a house of cards in a windstorm. The economic realities of managing the family estate were a constant backdrop to his creative endeavors. The Tagore estates, spread across thousands of acres, required meticulous management, and let's just say that poetry doesn't exactly pay the bills. The agricultural income was often inconsistent, and Rabindranath had to take on the role of landlord, a gig as glamorous as a root canal. He often had to negotiate with tenants and manage resources, all while balancing his artistic ambitions. In this juggling act between poetry and pragmatism, Tagore's humour shone through. He once remarked that aging was like a series of descending possibilities, a wry acknowledgement that even geniuses aren't immune to the march of time. His letters from this period, filled with sardonic reflections on growing old, reveal a man who could laugh at the absurdities of life even as he grappled with them. Imagine him, quill in hand, chuckling at the irony of becoming a global icon while fretting over crop yields in rural Bengal. Yet, for all his humorous musings, Tagore never lost sight of his vision for a better society. Rural development was close to his heart, and he established the Institute of Rural Reconstruction in 1921, later known as Srinikitan. This was more than just a philanthropic venture, it was his laboratory for social change. Srinikitan aimed to empower rural communities through education, economic self-sufficiency, and healthcare. Tagore believed that true independence was not just political, but also economic and social. He once said, "A mind all logic is like a knife, all blade. It makes the hand bleed that uses it." He understood that real progress meant addressing the root causes of poverty, not just the symptoms. Tagore's approach to rural development was visionary, but hardly free of challenges. Economic realities often clashed with idealistic goals, and funding was a perpetual problem. It was a testament to his disarming charm and relentless optimism that he managed to keep these initiatives afloat. Tagore was essentially a one-man NGO, navigating the complexities of fame, philosophical inquiry, and the harsh realities of rural India. As for his legacy, Tagore was acutely aware of the footprints he was leaving behind. He was a philosopher-poet who lived in the present, but was always a few steps ahead. His literary works, educational reforms, and social initiatives were like seeds planted in fertile ground, waiting to bloom long after he'd penned his final stanza. His thoughts on legacy were tinged with the wisdom of a man who'd seen the world transform, and he often contemplated the ephemeral nature of fame. He once mused, "Let me not pray to be sheltered from dangers, but to be fearless in facing them." For Tagore, legacy was not about monuments or awards, but about ideas that could withstand the test of time. In navigating the complexities of his fame, Tagore was a master of balancing act. He understood that his celebrity status could be a double-edged sword, opening doors while also trapping him in a gilded cage of expectations. Yet he wielded his fame with a deft touch, using it as a platform to advocate for his ideals while keeping his feet firmly planted in the soil of his homeland. As we inch closer to the twilight of Tagore's story, it's clear that his later years were a vibrant tapestry of creativity, reform, and introspection. His contributions to art, music, and social change were not mere footnotes in his biography, but integral chapters in a life that defied the conventional boundaries of genius. As we prepare to turn the final page, let's keep in mind that with Tagore, the story is never quite as simple as it seems. His life was a testament to the power of ideas, the beauty of art, and the enduring quest for a better world. But hold that thought, because the final act still awaits, promising revelations as profound as the man himself. As we turn the final page on Rabindranath Tagore's life, it's tempting to tie everything up in a neat bow of poetic genius and cross-cultural diplomacy. But hold your horses. Tagore's legacy is more tangled than your earbuds after a jog. Let's start with a fact. Tagore was the first Asian Nobel laureate, snagging the Literature Prize in 1913 for Gitanjali. This was no small feat in a world where Western literary circles were as exclusive as a VIP lounge at the Ritz. His win wasn't just a personal triumph, but a seismic shift in global literary recognition, showing that the East had something profound to offer the world. Now, Tagore's impact on literature is like that of a rock tossed into a pond, with ripples still felt today. His poetry and prose have been translated into countless languages, making him one of the most translated authors in history. From Bengali to Spanish, his works have crossed borders, proving that the themes of love, nature, and the human condition are as universal as a bad hair day. But let's not sugarcoat it. Translating Tagore is notoriously tricky. His nuanced language and cultural references are like trying to explain cricket to an American football fan. You're never quite sure if they get it. Beyond literature, Tagore's vision for education was nothing short of revolutionary. His establishment of Visva Bharati University in 1921 was his antidote to the rote learning he so despised. Here, students were encouraged to think, not just memorize. The university became a melting pot of ideas, attracting luminaries like Albert Einstein and Mahatma Gandhi. Imagine Einstein scribbling equations on a blackboard while Gandhi pondered the virtues of non-violence over a cup of chai. That's the kind of intellectual powerhouse Tagore envisioned, and it's still going strong today, fostering generations of thinkers who dare to question and innovate. But what's a legacy without a little myth-busting? Tagore is often painted as a saintly figure, a wise old man with flowing robes and a serene smile. In reality, he was as human as they come, prone to doubts and contradictions. He was a critic of nationalism, yet fiercely proud of his cultural roots. He renounced his knighthood to protest British atrocities, but maintained dialogues with British intellectuals. It's this complexity that makes him so compelling. He was neither a saint nor a sinner, but a man navigating a world as complicated as a Tagore poem. One cannot ignore Tagore's role as a cultural bridge between the East and the West. His tours across continents were not just about spreading Indian culture, but also about bringing global ideas back home. In Japan, he cautioned against excessive nationalism, while in the US, he criticized materialism. He was like a cultural sponge, absorbing and reflecting the best and worst of both worlds. But let's not romanticize his role as a bridge too much. It wasn't always smooth sailing. He often faced criticism from both sides, like a referee caught between two rival teams. In reflecting on mortality, Tagore had a sense of humour sharper than a freshly honed pencil. He once wrote, "Death is not extinguishing the light, it is only putting out the lamp because the dawn has come." Not exactly your standard Hallmark card sentiment, but it captures his philosophical outlook on life and death. For Tagore, mortality was not something to be feared, but a natural progression in the grand tapestry of existence. His musings on life and death offer a timeless wisdom that resonates with anyone who's ever pondered the big questions over a cup of tea. As we conclude this journey through Tagore's life, it's clear that his legacy is both romanticized and grounded in tangible achievements. He was a poet, philosopher, musician, artist, and social reformer, a polymath of the highest order. Yet, he was also a landlord, a family man, and a pragmatist who understood the harsh realities of the world. His life was a delicate balancing act between idealism and practicality, art and economics, East and West. And in this balancing act, he left behind a legacy that continues to inspire, challenge, and provoke thought. So, as you drift off to sleep, cradled by the knowledge of Tagore's life, remember this: legacies aren't built in a day, nor are they the sum of a single achievement. They're the culmination of a lifetime of choices, both grand and mundane. Tagore's life was a testament to the power of ideas, the beauty of art, and the enduring quest for a better world. And in the end, perhaps that's the most profound legacy of all. In the land of olive oil and philosophical debates, the Spartans were the ones who skipped the toga party to hit the gym instead. You see, in ancient Greece, while some were mastering the art of public speaking, the Spartans were perfecting the art of public spanking, or so it seemed with their intense training regimen known as the agorga. Picture this: at the tender age of 7, when most kids today are just figuring out how to not eat paste, Spartan boys were yanked from their homes and tossed into a boot camp that would make modern Marine Corps training look like a spa weekend. Let's get something straight. This wasn't just about turning little Timmy into a buff warrior. This was survival of the fittest, literally. The Spartan agoge was a state-sponsored, no-nonsense education system designed to craft the ultimate soldier. It was like the original Hunger Games, minus the televised spectacle. In a society where the state was more helicopter parent than laissez-faire, boys were rigorously trained, disciplined, and socialized to become warriors capable of defending the state at any cost. This wasn't just a phase, it was the law, and it was brutal. Now, forget about the romanticized image of Spartan warriors marching heroically into battle with the perfect six-pack. The reality was much grittier. Young Spartans were subjected to communal living arrangements that made today's dorm life look like a cushy penthouse suite. They slept on makeshift beds of reeds, and were often deliberately underfed to encourage them to become resourceful and cunning. The idea was to teach them to steal without getting caught, a practice that might raise a few eyebrows today, but back then it was considered a life skill. If you got caught, well, that was a different kind of lesson. Speaking of lessons, every Spartan boy was also trained in the fine art of the one-liner. Yes, the original "come back with your shield or on it" was more than just a battle cry, it was a way of life. Spartans valued wit almost as much as they valued physical prowess. A quick tongue was seen as a sign of a quick mind, and in a world where your survival could depend on your ability to outsmart opponents, a sharp retort could be just as deadly as a sharp sword. This intense focus on discipline and communal living was less about romantic heroism and more about creating a society that could withstand the harsh realities of constant warfare. The city-state was surrounded by hostile neighbors, and peace was more of a temporary ceasefire than a permanent state of being. The agoge was Spartan society's insurance policy, ensuring that every young man could contribute to the communal defense. The stakes were high, and the training was merciless. As they grew older, Spartan males were expected to join the syssitia, or communal messes. Here they would dine with their comrades, reinforcing the bonds of brotherhood and mutual reliance. This wasn't just about camaraderie, it was a calculated move to ensure loyalty to the group over family. By the time they reached adulthood, a Spartan man's loyalty was to his fellow soldiers first, his family second. It was a society built on the notion that the needs of the many outweighed the needs of the few, a philosophy that would make Mr. Spock proud. Now, if you're thinking all this sounds like a medieval version of modern-day boot camps, you're not wrong. But here's the kicker. While today's military training emphasizes physical prowess and tactical knowledge, the Spartans were also all about psychological warfare. They cultivated an aura of invincibility, using fear as a weapon just as effectively as their spears. The legend of Spartan invincibility was as much a tool of war as their military formations. You didn't just fight the Spartans, you fought the idea of the Spartans, and that could be downright terrifying. So, while the movies might paint them as caped crusaders with an affinity for slow-motion battle scenes, the truth is the Spartan way was a constant battle against complacency and weakness. Their strategies were born from necessity, driven by the harsh realities of their environment and their unyielding desire to protect their homeland. In a world where the line between life and death was as thin as a spear's edge, every Spartan knew one thing for certain. Survival wasn't just the goal, it was the only option. But let's leave the gym rats of ancient Greece behind for a moment and dive into the battlefield, where the Spartans truly flexed their muscles. Enter the phalanx, the ancient world's version of a human panzer division. Imagine a wall of bronze and muscle moving as one, each soldier's shield overlapping the next, creating an impenetrable barrier. This was not just a formation, it was a philosophy. Each hoplite was a cog in a machine that, when all gears turned in unison, became an unstoppable force. With their 8-foot-long spears, the dory, as their weapon of choice, Spartans could reach out and touch someone quite literally from a distance, while their enemies flailed helplessly against their shields. The precision of the phalanx was its strength. Picture this. Ranks of men moving like a well-choreographed dance troupe, minus the jazz hands. They advanced in a tightly packed formation, shoulder to shoulder, shield to shield. This wasn't just a military tactic, it was a trust exercise with lethal consequences. Each man relied on the protection of his neighbour, because if one link in the chain broke, the whole thing unravelled faster than a poorly knitted sweater. Yet, while the phalanx was a marvel of military engineering, it wasn't without its Achilles heel, literally. The flanks were vulnerable, and if an enemy could manage to outmaneuver them, the phalanx could be outflanked and enveloped. A classic case of your greatest strength is also your greatest weakness. The Spartans were aware of this, of course, and trained tirelessly to mitigate such risks. But no matter how skilled, they were not invincible, and history would show that even the mightiest warrior can fall if caught off guard. Now, let's talk logistics. A word that sounds about as exciting as watching paint dry, but stick with me. The reality of maintaining an army was far more complex than just pointing them in the right direction and yelling, "Charge!" Here's where the myth of Spartan invincibility meets the cold, hard slap of reality. Feeding, clothing, and housing these elite warriors was no small feat. Each Spartan soldier required daily sustenance to maintain their fearsome physique, and we're not talking about a light salad and a protein shake here. Estimates suggest that an army on the move needed anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000 calories per day per soldier. That's a lot of lamb and barley cakes, folks. And let's not forget the gear. A Spartan hoplite's panoply or armor was a veritable smorgasbord of bronze. The iconic hoplon shield alone weighed about 15 pounds, about the size of a toddler who's just discovered ice cream. Add to that the helmet, cuirass, greaves, and you're looking at an ensemble that could easily exceed 70 pounds. Now imagine marching for miles in this get-up, under a relentless Greek sun. These guys weren't just warriors, they were mobile saunas. Despite the romanticized image of the noble Spartan, life in the phalanx was anything but glamorous. The men were often hangry, hungry and angry, a lethal combination when you're wielding a spear. But Spartan discipline was legendary, and they soldiered on, fueled by duty, loyalty, and, perhaps, the knowledge that complaining would only earn them a stern word from their commander. Or worse, they'd have to listen to another one of those motivational speeches about honor and glory. Speaking of motivation, the Spartans were masterful at psychological warfare. Their reputation alone was often enough to instill fear in the hearts of their enemies before a single spear was thrown. But it wasn't all smoke and mirrors. The legend of Spartan invincibility was carefully cultivated through tales of heroism and valor, often exaggerated for effect. After all, a good story can be as powerful as a sharp spear, and the Spartans were nothing if not aware of the power of myth. Yet, for all their strengths, the Spartans were human. They were subject to the same flaws and frailties as anyone else. The myth of Spartan invincibility was as much about managing perceptions as it was about military might. They knew that a well-timed PR campaign could be as effective as an ambush, and they played that card with the skill of a seasoned diplomat. So, while the world remembers them as the ultimate warriors, the reality of life in the phalanx was a far cry from the romanticized tales of yore. It was tough, relentless, and often brutal. But it was also a testament to the human spirit's ability to endure and overcome, to adapt and conquer. And that, perhaps, is the true legacy of the Spartans, not their invincibility, but their resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. As we continue to unravel the tapestry of Spartan history, it's clear that the truth is as complex and multifaceted as the society itself. There's more to the story than meets the eye, and the deeper you dig, the more you realize that the Spartans were as much a product of their time as they were architects of their fate. Stay tuned, because the saga of Sparta is far from over, and there's plenty more to explore. So, just when you thought Spartan society couldn't get any tougher, let's talk about the real MVPs behind the scenes. The helots. Think of them as the overworked stagehands making sure the spotlight stayed firmly on the Spartan warriors. These were the folks doing the dirty work while the Spartans were busy perfecting their biceps and their battle cries. If you ever wondered how a society could afford to keep its citizenry in a perpetual state of military readiness, here's your answer: helots. Helots were essentially the state's agricultural backbone, working the land so that the Spartans could focus their energies on military pursuits. Picture this. While Spartan men were out performing synchronized spear routines, helots were the ones tilling the fields, harvesting crops, and basically keeping the whole Spartan economy from collapsing faster than a souffle in a marching band. Estimates indicate that helots outnumbered Spartans by a staggering ratio, possibly as high as 7-1. Talk about being outnumbered. But before you start imagining the helots as downtrodden peasants with a penchant for revolting, let's delve into why they stuck around. The Spartan system wasn't exactly a democracy, and the helots were kept in line through a mix of fear, coercion, and the occasional annual culling, a euphemistic term for sanctioned violence to remind them who held the power. This wasn't just about keeping the helots in check, it was about maintaining the status quo. The Spartans were acutely aware that their entire way of life depended on keeping the helots subjugated. An uprising wasn't just an inconvenience, it was an existential threat. Now, let's not pretend this was some egalitarian utopia. Spartan society was less about everyone holding hands and more about everyone knowing their place, or else. The helots were essentially state-owned serfs, tied to the land, unable to leave without permission, and required to hand over a significant portion of their produce to their Spartan overlords. This wasn't a gig economy, it was the original work-life imbalance. But why did the Spartans need such a rigid system? Simple. It allowed them to focus almost exclusively on their military endeavors. While the helots handled the mundane tasks of daily life, Spartan citizens were free to train, strategize, and maintain their fearsome reputation. The whole setup was a bit like a pyramid scheme, except the only thing trickling down was more hard labor for the helots. And here's a fun twist. Even among the Spartans themselves, not everyone was equal. At the top of the social hierarchy were the Spartiates, full citizens with all the perks, land, power, and the privilege of spending their days training for war. Below them were the perioikoi, the free but non-citizen inhabitants of Sparta. These were the craftsmen, traders, and manufacturers, the ones who kept the gears of commerce turning while the Spartiates were busy flexing in the mirror. This rigid social structure might sound like a page ripped from a dystopian novel, but it was a well-oiled machine that functioned with ruthless efficiency. The Spartans knew that in a world of constant warfare and shifting alliances, every citizen had to be a soldier first, and the helots made that possible. Their labor allowed the Spartans to dedicate themselves fully to the art of war, creating a society where military service was not just an obligation, but a defining characteristic of citizenship. Now, let's talk about the economics of this setup. Maintaining a standing army isn't cheap, and the Spartans were nothing if not frugal. The helots supplied the necessary agricultural produce to sustain the Spartan diet, while the perioikoi provided the goods and services that kept the economy afloat. This setup allowed the Spartans to avoid engaging in trade with the outside world, which they viewed as a corrupting influence. Why bother with foreign markets when you could just keep everything in-house? Yet, for all the Spartans' efforts to maintain this delicate balance, it was an inherently unstable system. The constant fear of a helot uprising was a sword hanging over Spartan society. It forced them to be ever vigilant, to maintain their military prowess, and to never let their guard down. The irony is that the very system designed to ensure their security also made them vulnerable. By relying so heavily on the helots, the Spartans created a powder keg just waiting for a spark. In this high-stakes game of societal Jenga, it was only a matter of time before the pieces began to wobble. The Spartan way was a double-edged sword, one that was as likely to cut them as it was to defend them. They were trapped in a cycle of dependence and domination, a precarious balancing act where any misstep could lead to disaster. So, while the glamour of the Spartan warrior endures in legend, it's important to remember the invisible hands that held up the facade. Without the helots, the Spartan military machine would have ground to a halt. The truth is, behind every glorious battle and every legendary hero, there was a host of unsung labourers who made it all possible. The real story of Sparta is one of complexity and contradiction, a society that thrived on the backs of the very people it oppressed. As we continue to peel back the layers of Spartan history, it's a reminder that the past is never as simple as it seems, and the truth is often hidden beneath a veneer of myth and legend. And just when you think Spartan society couldn't get any more complex, enter the political arena where the real magic or mayhem, depending on whom you ask, happened. In Sparta, power didn't rest in the hands of a single ruler, but rather two kings. Yep, you heard that right, a dual kingship system. It's like they took the old adage, 2 heads are better than one, a bit too literally. But this wasn't your typical buddy cop movie duo. These kings often argued more than they agreed, which was kind of the point. The dual kingship was Sparta's insurance policy against tyranny. If one king got a little too big for his sandals, the other could bring him back down to earth, or at least try to. This system was supposed to minimize the risk of catastrophic decision-making. Imagine you're in a chariot race, and your ride has 2 drivers who can't stop bickering. It sounds chaotic, and it was, but it worked, most of the time. The kings were from 2 different royal families, the Agiads and the Eurypontids, and they were expected to check and balance each other. Think of it as Sparta's own version of a constitutional monarchy, minus the tea and crumpets. Now, these kings weren't just for show, they were expected to lead in battle, proving their worth on the battlefield. This dual leadership model was about as stable as a 2-legged stool. One wrong move, and everyone hits the ground. Yet, the kings were not all powerful. They were held accountable by the Gerousia, a council of elders who were like the Senate, but with more wrinkles and less toga. This council, along with the ephors, a group of 5 officials, elected annually, ensured that the kings didn't get too carried away with their grand plans. One of the most famous kings to rise from this system was Leonidas I, who led the Spartans at the Battle of Thermopylae in 480 BC. Thermopylae, the stuff of legends and slow-motion battle scenes. This was the battle where 300 Spartans, along with a few thousand allies, faced off against the might of the Persian Empire. Talk about fighting against insurmountable odds. The reality, however, was less Hollywood blockbuster and more gritty historical drama. The narrow pass at Thermopylae was the perfect choke point, allowing the vastly outnumbered Greeks to hold off the Persian army led by King Xerxes I first. We're talking about a force of around 7,000 Greeks against possibly 100,000 to 150,000 Persians. The numbers are fuzzy because ancient historians had a penchant for exaggeration, kind of like your uncle's fishing stories, but the odds were still steep, and the Spartans knew it. Their mission was to delay the Persians long enough for the rest of Greece to prepare its defences. Leonidas and his men did what Spartans did best. They held the line. For 3 days they fended off wave after wave of Persian attacks. The Spartan phalanx, with shields locked and spears ready, was a nearly impenetrable force. The Persians, with their lighter armour and shorter weapons, struggled to make any headway. It was like trying to punch through a brick wall with a water balloon. But here's the kicker. The glorious last stand wasn't just about military strategy. It was a masterclass in propaganda. The Spartans knew that even in death their defiance would inspire others. The phrase, "Go, tell the Spartans," became a rallying cry, a testament to their sacrifice. This wasn't just about holding a pass, it was about shaping the narrative. The Spartans turned what could have been a catastrophic defeat into a legendary tale of heroism and valour. It was a PR coup that would make modern spin doctors green with envy. Yet, let's not gloss over the brutal reality. The Spartans and their allies were ultimately outflanked, betrayed by a local who showed the Persians a secret path around the pass. Leonidas and his men fought to the last, knowing full well that reinforcements weren't coming. It was a calculated sacrifice, and it worked. The delay at Thermopylae gave Athens and the other city-states time to prepare their defences, leading to eventual Greek victories at Salamis and Plataea. So, while the Battle of Thermopylae has been romanticised as the ultimate showdown of good versus evil, the truth is a bit more complicated. It was a tactical move that relied on both military might and psychological warfare. The Spartans understood the power of a good story, and they crafted one that would echo through the ages. They turned defeat into a symbol of resistance, a narrative that would bolster Greek unity against a common foe. In the political chess game that was ancient Greece, the Spartans were masters of both the battlefield and the narrative. Their dual kingship system, for all its flaws, provided a measure of stability in an otherwise volatile region. It allowed them to maintain a military-focused society while keeping internal power struggles in check. And when it came to battles like Thermopylae, the Spartans proved that sometimes the story you leave behind is as important as the battle itself. But let's not forget the economic realities underpinning these grand narratives. The constant warfare required resources, lots of them. The Spartan economy was a finely tuned machine, dependent not just on the labour of the helots, but also on the spoils of war. Victory in battle wasn't just about glory, it was about survival. The loot from successful campaigns supplemented the Spartan economy, allowing them to maintain their military machine and keep the helots in line. This was a society built on the edge of a knife, balancing military prowess with economic necessity. The Spartans knew that their survival depended not just on their ability to fight, but also on their ability to sustain their way of life. It was a precarious existence, one that required constant vigilance and a willingness to adapt to changing circumstances. As we continue to explore the tapestry of Spartan history, it's clear that the story is far from over. The dual kingship, the battles, the economic realities, all of these threads weave together to create a complex and multifaceted society. The Spartans were more than just warriors. They were strategists, politicians, and storytellers. And their legacy, for better or worse, continues to captivate us to this day. So, as we leave the battlefield of Thermopylae behind, remember that the story of Sparta is one of resilience, cunning, and the relentless pursuit of survival. Stay tuned, because there's more to come in this saga of ancient grit and glory. So, as we leave the battlefield of Thermopylae behind, let's fast forward through the annals of time to what happened after the Spartans rode the high of their legendary stand. You'd think such a reputation for kicking Persian behinds would solidify their spot at the top of the Greek food chain, right? Well, not quite. Sparta's glory days were a bit like a rock band living off one-hit single. Even the most epic ballad gets old. Enter the Peloponnesian War, that drawn-out brawl between Sparta and Athens, lasting from 431 to 404 BC. It was like a family feud on steroids, with Greek city-states picking sides and duking it out over land, power, and the best recipe for baklava. Sparta, the militaristic powerhouse with its disciplined phalanx, versus Athens, the cultural juggernaut with a navy that would make Poseidon proud. It was a clash of titans, and initially Sparta managed to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat, thanks in no small part to some strategic alliances and a hefty loan from Persia. Irony alert, their former nemesis helped them out? Finance the Athenians. But here's the plot twist. Winning the war didn't translate into winning peace. The Spartans found themselves in over their heads when it came to governing. Picture a bunch of hardcore gym rats suddenly asked to host a book club. They just weren't cut out for it. Their rigid system of military dominance, while superb at winning battles, was like using a sledgehammer to tune a piano when it came to politics and administration. They tried to impose their austere ways on other Greek city-states, but surprise, surprise, no one else wanted to live like a Spartan, subsisting on a diet of discipline and minimalism. Sparta's downfall was a slow burn, like a candle melting from both ends. Their population, the backbone of their military machine, began dwindling. The system that once produced wave after wave of hoplites was suddenly running out of recruits. The Spartans had built their society on a foundation of exclusivity, Only full citizens, the Spartiates, could serve in the army. But as wars took their toll, the number of these elite citizens plummeted. By 3071 BC, at the Battle of Leuctra, Sparta faced a shocking defeat at the hands of the Thebans, led by the brilliant general Epaminondas. The Spartans, outnumbered and outmaneuvered, saw their phalanx crumble like a poorly stacked Jenga tower. Leuctra was more than just a military loss, it was a wake-up call that Sparta's system was as outdated as an old rotary phone. The rigid social hierarchy and the oppressive treatment of the helots, which had once fueled Spartan dominance, became their Achilles' heel. Helot revolts popped up like unwanted ads, and the once feared Spartan warriors found themselves struggling to maintain control. As Sparta's influence waned, other Greek city-states took notes. Some wrote them on papyrus, others mentally filed them away. Athens, for one, learned the importance of having a diversified economy and a flexible political system. The Athenians figured out that while military might was crucial, cultural and economic power could be just as influential. Meanwhile, the Macedonians under Philip II and his son, Alexander the Great, took the concept of a professional army and ran with it, literally across half the known world. They understood that adaptability and innovation were key, something Sparta had failed to grasp. Despite their decline, the allure of Spartan simplicity and strength endured. There was something undeniably appealing about their minimalist lifestyle, even if reality was more sweat and toil than heroic swagger. The Spartan ethos of discipline and resilience continued to captivate the imagination, a testament to the power of myth over mundane reality. While their society eventually faded into the misty pages of history, the Spartans left behind a legacy that was more than just military tactics. They became a symbol of endurance, of standing firm in the face of overwhelming odds, even if it meant going down swinging. So, what's the takeaway from the Spartan saga? Perhaps it's the age-old lesson that adaptation is key. In a world that's constantly changing, those who cling too tightly to tradition risk being left behind. Sparta's story is both a cautionary tale and a reminder of the human spirit's capacity for resilience. It's about knowing when to hold the line and when to pivot, a dance between strength and flexibility. In the end, while the Spartan way may have crumbled under its own rigid weight, its impact is undeniable. The tales of their discipline, their courage, and their simplicity continue to echo through time, reminding us that even the most formidable warriors were, at their core, human. As we bid farewell to the land of red cloaks and bronze shields, let's remember that history is as much about the stories we tell as the facts we uncover. And in the case of the Spartans, those stories are as enduring as their legendary stand at Thermopylae. So grab a metaphorical spear, sharpen your wit, and keep an eye on the horizon, because history, much like Sparta, is always waiting for the next challenge. Boudicca's story begins not with a grand entrance, but with the relentless stomp of Roman boots on British soil in AD 43. This wasn't just any old visit, it was a full-blown Roman-style invasion led by Emperor Claudius. Picture it, the Romans, with their shiny armor and a penchant for straight roads, landing with the subtlety of a brass band. They didn't just bring military might, they brought taxes, land seizures, and the kind of bureaucracy that could make your head spin faster than a chariot wheel. Now, let's talk about the Iceni, one of the Celtic tribes in Britain who had the misfortune of being in the Romans' crosshairs. These folks weren't exactly thrilled with the new Roman overlords. Imagine being forced to pay taxes to some distant emperor who couldn't even pronounce your name correctly. It's like your least favourite cousin crashing at your place indefinitely and demanding rent. The Romans were thorough, though, with their economic demands, land grabs, hefty taxes, and more rules than a board game night gone wrong. In this mix of cultural chaos and economic upheaval, we find Boudicca. Before she became the fierce face of rebellion, she was known as the wife of Prasutagus, the king of the Iceni. Prasutagus had a rather interesting arrangement with the Romans. He was a client king, a sort of dual citizenship deal. This meant he kept his crown but had to play nice with Rome, a bit like being the head of a company while still answering to the board. Boudicca herself was no wallflower. Descriptions of her paint a vivid picture of a woman who commanded respect and fear in equal measure. Ancient sources, like the Roman historian Tacitus, describe her as tall with fierce eyes and a voice that could put a drill sergeant to shame. She was the kind of person who didn't just enter a room, she took over the space. The cultural clash between the Celts and Romans was more than just a difference in togas versus tartans. The Romans, with their obsession for order and urban planning, met the Celts, who were all about tribal loyalty and living in harmony with nature. This wasn't just a clash of civilizations, it was a full-on headbutt. The Celts, with their oral traditions and warrior ethos, found the Roman penchant for written edicts and legal jargon to be as appealing as a cold bath in January. Economically, the Romans weren't exactly kind to the Celts. They imposed taxes that could cripple a tribe's economy faster than you can say sesterces. Land seizures were rampant, with Roman veterans often being granted parcels of the best land, leaving the locals with little more than scraps. This wasn't just land theft, it was cultural erasure, a deliberate attempt to cement Roman control by uprooting native traditions. Prasutagus, in his attempt to keep the peace, had struck a bargain with Rome that was supposed to ensure his kingdom's semi-independence even after his death. But, as anyone familiar with Roman politics might suspect, promises were about as reliable as a British summer. Spoiler alert, things didn't go as planned. Before the revolt that would etch her name into history, Boudicca's life was intertwined with these tensions. Married to Prasutagus, she was likely involved in the daily governance of her people, a behind-the-scenes operator who understood both the power of diplomacy and the necessity of strength. The dual citizenship agreement was a precarious balancing act. Trying to maintain Iceni autonomy while placating the ever-demanding Romans was like juggling flaming torches. The Romans, with their love for documentation, left us with a paper trail that hints at the tumultuous economic situation. The Celts were forced to pay tribute in goods and labor, a system that strained their resources and pushed many to the brink. While the romantic notion of a noble savage standing against the might of Rome is appealing, the reality was more brutal. It was about survival in the face of relentless exploitation. The stage was set for a conflict that would become legendary. The Roman occupation, with its mix of military might and economic exploitation, sowed the seeds of unrest across the land. For Boudicca, it wasn't just about resisting Rome, it was about reclaiming her people's dignity and way of life. As the Romans continued their march across Britain, they underestimated the power of a united Celtic front, and more importantly, the unyielding will of a warrior queen who was about to become their worst nightmare. And then, as if the gods of chaos decided to up the ante, Prasutagus passed away. He left behind not just a grieving family, but a ticking political time bomb. Now, Prasutagus had crafted a will that was supposed to be a diplomatic masterpiece, or so he thought. He left his kingdom jointly to his daughters and the Roman emperor, a bit of an everyone's happy strategy, right? Wrong. The Romans saw this as an open invitation to crash the Iceni party, and not in a bring-your-own-wine kind of way. They ignored the daughter's inheritance like a spam email, claiming the whole kingdom for themselves, because why share when you can take it all? This betrayal wasn't just a political faux pas, it was a full-blown diplomatic disaster. The Romans, masters of bureaucracy and bad manners, decided to enforce their claim with a little extra flair. When Boudicca objected, like any reasonable person might when their family and future are being bulldozed, she and her daughters faced brutal treatment that was less about punishment and more about making a point. The Romans flogged Boudicca publicly and violated her daughters, an act so vile it made it abundantly clear that the Romans weren't interested in playing nice. It was the kind of move that screamed, "Revolt now or forever hold your peace." For the Iceni and their neighbors, this was the last straw. The economic strain was one thing, but this was an attack on their dignity, their honor, essentially their entire way of life. The tribes had been simmering under Roman oppression like a pot just waiting to boil over. And now, Boudicca was ready to light the fire. Boudicca wasn't just any leader, though. She had a knack for fiery rhetoric that could rally the most disheartened of warriors. Her speeches were legendary, the kind that would make you want to leap onto a horse and charge into battle, even if you were more accustomed to tending sheep. She called on her fellow Britons to rise up against the Romans, painting a vivid picture of freedom lost and the chance to reclaim it. It was less about revenge and more about reclaiming autonomy, freedom from taxes that could drain a tribe's resources faster than a Roman aqueduct. But this wasn't just a one-woman show. Boudicca's charisma drew in neighboring tribes who were equally fed up with Roman demands. The Trinovantes, for instance, had lost their capital, Camulodunum, modern-day Colchester, to Roman veterans who transformed it into a colony, complete with a temple to Emperor Claudius. Imagine being evicted from your home, only to have it turned into a shrine for the very guy who kicked you out. Yeah, not a popular move. Social tensions were brewing like a storm on the horizon. The Romans had imposed their laws, their taxes, and their architecture with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. For the native Britons, this wasn't just about land or money. It was about their identity being eroded by an occupying force that viewed them as little more than barbarians to be civilized. The Romans had taken the Celts' lands, their resources, and now, with their actions against Boudicca and her family, they had tried to take their spirit. Boudicca's call to arms wasn't just about revenge for her personal suffering. It was a rallying cry for a people on the brink of losing everything they held dear. And let's not forget the economic burden, tribute payments, forced labor, and land seizures had left many tribes on the brink of ruin. The promise of regaining what had been lost, of throwing off the Roman yoke and reclaiming their autonomy, was a powerful motivator. So, as Boudicca gathered her forces, the Roman Empire, in all its grandeur and arrogance, had no idea what was coming. They underestimated the power of a unified Celtic force and the unyielding will of a woman scorned. The stage was set for a confrontation that would echo through the annals of history, a clash not just of arms but of ideals, freedom against subjugation, dignity against tyranny. The storm was gathering, and Boudicca stood at its center, ready to unleash a tempest that would shake the Roman Empire to its foundations. But, as with all things in history, the outcome was far from certain. Would the Celts' fiery spirit be enough to turn the tide? Or would the Roman juggernaut prove too formidable? Only time, and a few more chapters of history, would tell. As the storm clouds of rebellion gathered over Britannia, Boudicca was not just leading an army, she was orchestrating a symphony of resistance that would soon play a tune the Romans couldn't ignore. First on the hit list was Camulodunum, or, as we know it today, Colchester. This wasn't just any old town, it was the Roman colonial capital, complete with a temple to the deified Emperor Claudius. Think of it as the Romans' version of a trophy case. Except this one was about to be violently upended. Boudicca's forces, a motley crew of Iceni and Trinovantes, descended upon Camulodunum with the kind of fervor usually reserved for a Black Friday sale. The Romans, confident in their shiny town, hadn't exactly prepared for a full-scale revolt led by a furious queen with a bone to pick. The small garrison and the civilian population were caught off guard, like deer in headlights, as Boudicca's warriors stormed the settlement. Within days, Camulodunum was reduced to smouldering ruins. The temple, that symbol of Roman power, was razed, a fiery exclamation point on a statement of defiance. The Romans' lack of contingency plans for an angry queen with armies was glaringly obvious. It was as if they'd assumed their architecture alone could withstand fury, a critical underestimation. Not content with one victory, Boudicca's forces moved swiftly, their next target Londinium, known today as London. At the time, Londinium was a burgeoning trade hub, a magnet for merchants and Roman citizens who thought they'd found a cozy niche in the Roman world. But guess what? Boudicca wasn't interested in Londinium's economic potential. Instead, she saw it as the heart of Roman oppression, a symbol of everything her people had suffered. With the precision of a military strategist seasoned beyond her experience, she struck when the town was least prepared. The Roman governor, Suetonius Paulinus, realizing the futility of defending Londinium with the resources at hand, evacuated the city, leaving it to Boudicca's wrath. The result? Another city laid waste, a testament to the power of a people united in their quest for vengeance. The fires that raged through Londinium were so intense that archaeological evidence shows a thick layer of charred debris, a historical scar akin to a bad breakup that leaves your whole life in ashes. And then there was Verulamium, or St. Albans to you and me. This town, like its predecessors, was a bastion of Roman influence and wealth. It was a place where Roman veterans retired with their spoils, a cozy spot for those who'd once wielded swords to now wield plows. But Boudicca and her warriors had no intention of letting this retirement community thrive under Roman rule. They descended upon it with the same fiery determination, ensuring that Verulamium too would join the list of Roman casualties. In just a short span, 3 major Roman settlements were crippled, their inhabitants either killed or fleeing in chaos. Now, let's talk numbers. The scale of destruction was unprecedented, with estimates suggesting that between 70,000 and 80,000 Roman citizens and allies met their end during these uprisings. It's a staggering figure, a testament to Boudicca's resolve and the pent-up fury of the oppressed. The Roman Empire, with all its might and glory, had been blindsided by a force that they had woefully underestimated. This was more than just a rebellion. It was a logistical nightmare that sent shockwaves back to Rome itself. The Romans, masters of bureaucracy and organization, suddenly found themselves in the midst of a crisis that no amount of paperwork could solve. Their carefully planned roads, those marvels of engineering, were now conduits of chaos as refugees and survivors fled the burning cities. The Roman military, spread thin and caught on the back foot, scrambled to regroup and counter this unexpected and devastating assault. Boudicca's campaign wasn't just a series of military victories, it was a psychological blow that shook the very core of Roman invincibility. The empire, which had prided itself on its ability to control and assimilate, was now facing an existential threat from a people who refused to be tamed. The tales of Boudicca's wrath reached far and wide, a chilling reminder that even the mightiest empire could be brought to its knees by the relentless will of those it sought to subjugate. Yet, while the romantic image of Boudicca as a warrior queen leading her people to freedom is undeniably appealing, the harsh reality was far more complex. This wasn't a fairy tale of good versus evil. It was a brutal struggle for survival in a world where power was often the only currency that mattered. The Romans, with their legions and laws, had underestimated the resilience of a people pushed to the brink. Boudicca, with her charisma and conviction, had ignited a fire that would burn in the annals of history long after the smoke had cleared. As the dust settled on these early battles, the question remained, could Boudicca's forces maintain their momentum against the might of Rome? The empire, though battered, was far from defeated. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test the limits of both Roman resolve and Celtic defiance. This was a saga still unfolding, with twists and turns that no one could predict. For now, the Celts had struck a formidable blow, and the Romans were left to ponder the true cost of their imperial ambitions. The story of Boudicca was far from over, and the world watched with bated breath to see what the future would hold. The story of Boudicca's rebellion was far from over, and the world watched with bated breath to see what the future would hold. But let's hit pause on the Britons' fiery victories and talk Roman response, specifically Governor Suetonius Paulinus. Now, Suetonius wasn't exactly the kind of guy to sit back and let a rebellion waltz across his Roman backyard. Picture him as the kind of Roman who'd rather face a lion in the Colosseum than let a single hair on the empire's toga get ruffled. As news of Boudicca's rampage reached him, Suetonius was busy on the island of Mona, modern-day Anglesey, showing the Druids what Roman hospitality looked like. He was knee-deep in what was essentially a cultural demolition project, dismantling the Druid stronghold, chopping down sacred groves, and generally making himself as popular as a tax collector at a free festival. But upon hearing of the revolt, he did something very un-Roman. He made a strategic retreat. Suetonius realized that Boudicca's rebellion wasn't a mere skirmish, it was a full-blown crisis, the kind that could send an emperor into a toga-twisting frenzy. With Boudicca's forces having turned Londinium into a charred testimonial of Celtic wrath, he knew this wasn't going to be just another day at the office. The empire had to respond, and boy did they. Suetonius gathered his troops, bringing them together with the kind of efficiency that only Roman logistics could muster. He had around 10,000 men at his disposal, mostly legionaries, some auxiliaries, but they were disciplined, battle-hardened, and most importantly, very, very angry. Now, let's talk about the Battle of Watling Street, where these two forces would meet. Suetonius was all about strategy. While Boudicca's army was vast, some sources claim up to 230,000 strong, though that's probably more hyperbole than headcount. It was also a bit like a rebellious rock band on a world tour, high on enthusiasm, low on coordination. The Romans, on the other hand, were the military equivalent of a Swiss watch, precise, organized, and ready to tick-tock their way to victory. Suetonius chose his battlefield wisely. The location was a narrow gorge with dense woods on either side, a place where Boudicca's numerical advantage would be about as useful as a sun hat in a snowstorm. The Roman army, with their backs to the woods and the Britons charging head-on, formed a wedge, a classic Roman formation that maximized their ability to fight in close quarters. It was the military equivalent of inviting your enemies into a funnel and then systematically taking them down. But let's not get carried away with the romanticism of Roman tactics. The Britons, despite their numbers, lacked the discipline and armour of their Roman counterparts. Many were armed with little more than farm tools and gutsy determination. Suetonius, on the other hand, wielded the finest Roman military machine, and he knew exactly how to use it. The Celts, driven by rage and a thirst for revenge, charged with the kind of ferocity that would make a hurricane seem like a gentle breeze. But as they clashed with the Roman line, the disciplined legionaries held firm. According to Tacitus, the Roman historian with a flair for dramatic detail, Suetonius instructed his men to hold the line and wait for the right moment to strike. They must win the victory with their weapons and not with words, he purportedly said. The Romans held their ground until the Britons were within striking range. Then, with the precision of a maestro conducting an orchestra, they launched their counterattack. The legionaries thrust their pila, spears, into the charging masses, then drew swords to engage in brutal hand-to-hand combat. Cassius Dio, another historian with a penchant for hyperbole, claimed that the Roman soldiers showed a savage, unyielding efficiency, carving through the Britons with ruthless precision. The battle was bloody, chaotic, and devastatingly one-sided. The Britons, unable to maneuver in the confined space and faced with the unbreakable Roman line, began to falter. Their chariots, once a symbol of their might, became weapons against them, causing chaos and confusion in their own ranks. Despite their overwhelming numbers, Boudicca's forces found themselves hemmed in, unable to escape the tactical traps Suetonius had laid. The Roman cavalry, fresh and eager, charged forward, sealing the fate of the Celtic rebellion. Tacitus claims that the Britons were slaughtered in droves, with a staggering 80,000 Britons killed compared to just 400 Roman casualties. It was, by any measure, a complete and utter rout. But before we get too caught up in the Roman victory, let's remember the source of these numbers. Tacitus and Cassius Dio were both Roman historians, and their accounts, while rich in detail, are often drenched in Roman bias. The figures they provide might be more a reflection of Roman propaganda than actual battlefield statistics. After all, nothing says, "Don't mess with Rome," like a wildly lopsided victory claim. As the dust settled on Watling Street, the rebellion was effectively crushed, though Boudicca's ultimate fate remains a subject of historical debate. According to Tacitus, she took poison to avoid capture, a defiant end fitting her indomitable spirit. Cassius Dio, however, suggests she fell ill and died, one last twist in a saga filled with dramatic turns. The aftermath of the battle was grim for the Britons. The Romans, keen to reassert control, embarked on a campaign of retribution and reconstruction. Suetonius, bolstered by his victory, enacted punitive measures against any remaining pockets of resistance, ensuring that the fate of Boudicca's rebellion served as a stark lesson to other would-be insurgents. Londinium and other devastated cities were rebuilt, their charred remains serving as a foundation for a renewed Roman presence in Britain. But while the Romans may have claimed victory, Boudicca's rebellion left an indelible mark on the empire. It exposed vulnerabilities, challenged assumptions, and forced a recalibration of Roman policy in the province. The rebellion had been a wake-up call, a reminder that even the mighty Roman Empire was not invincible. So, what does all this tell us about human nature and the machinery of empires? Well, for one, it shows us that the spirit of resistance is a formidable force, capable of challenging even the most powerful of adversaries. Boudicca's legacy, though ultimately one of defeat, lives on as a symbol of defiance against tyranny, an icon of a people's struggle for autonomy in the face of overwhelming odds. Yet, it also serves as a cautionary tale about the brutal calculus of power. Empires, with their grand ambitions and unyielding appetites, often sow the seeds of their own resistance. The Romans, in their quest for control, had provoked a rebellion that nearly shattered their hold on Britain. In the end, it was a battle of wills, a clash of cultures, and a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. As the curtain falls on this chapter of history, the story of Boudicca is far from over. The impact of her rebellion, the lessons learned, and the enduring memory of a warrior queen who dared to challenge the might of Rome continue to resonate through the ages. And while the specifics of her fate may remain shrouded in mystery, her legacy is clear. A reminder that the quest for freedom and dignity can light a fire that even the greatest of empires cannot easily extinguish. With the curtain drawn on the fiery tale of Boudicca's rebellion, one might assume the Romans simply shook off the dust and carried on with their imperial business unscathed. But in the aftermath of this Celtic tempest, the Roman Empire found itself in a bit of a reflective mood, like a heavyweight champ who narrowly dodged a knockout punch and is now questioning his choice of sparring partners. The rebellion had laid bare the cracks in their governance strategy, and you better believe that got Rome's attention. Post-revolt, the Romans had to reconsider their approach to governing Britain. The brutality and arrogance that had sparked the rebellion were, unsurprisingly, not the best tools for long-term imperial harmony. Governor Suetonius Paulinus, the man of the hour at Watling Street, was soon replaced by the more conciliatory Publius Petronius Turpilianus. This change was not just about switching Roman togas, it signaled a policy shift. The empire began to adopt a more lenient governance style, like a stern parent realizing that grounding their child for life might not be the best way to foster a loving relationship. Roman policy became less about the iron fist and more about the velvet glove, integrating local elites into the administrative framework and offering a more carrot-than-stick approach. This meant reducing the heavy-handed taxations and land requisitions that had been about as welcome as a plague of locusts. Instead, the Romans focused on building infrastructure roads, towns, and the all-important bathhouses, creating a sense of Romanitas, or Romanness, that was more enticing than oppressive. The rationale was simple. If you can't beat them, make them want to join your Roman toga party. This new strategy wasn't just about appeasement, it was an economic necessity. The rebellion had cost the empire dearly, not just in lives but in cold, hard sesterces. Rebuilding destroyed settlements and maintaining military presence required a steady flow of funds, and Rome was keen to avoid another financial hemorrhage. Economic integration rather than outright domination became the order of the day. It was the kind of economic diplomacy that would make any modern trade negotiator nod in approval. But let's pivot to the legacy of Boudicca herself, that indomitable icon whose name still echoes through the ages like a battle cry. Over the centuries, Boudicca has been recast as everything from a noble freedom fighter to a wild-eyed barbarian queen, depending largely on who's telling her story. The romanticized warrior queen narrative is a compelling one, but it deserves a closer look. Yes, she was a fierce leader, but her rebellion was rooted in survival, dignity, and the harsh realities of occupation. This wasn't a medieval fantasy tale. It was a gritty struggle with stakes higher than a Roman aqueduct. Her story, however, has been reshaped and retold, much like a favorite song with endless covers, each adding its own twist. During the Renaissance, Boudicca was revived as a symbol of virtuous resistance, a narrative that gained traction in Victorian Britain, a time when the empire itself was flexing its own imperial muscles. She became a symbol of British nationalism, a handy icon for a nation keen on celebrating its own rebellious roots while simultaneously colonizing half the known world. Irony, thy name is empire. In modern times, Boudicca has become a feminist icon, a symbol of female empowerment and resilience. Her story has inspired countless works of art, literature, and even a statue in London, right near Westminster Bridge. If you ever wondered what it takes to get a bronze likeness in the heart of an empire, leading a rebellion against one seems like a good start. Yet, the romantic appeal should not overshadow the brutal reality of her campaign, which, while legendary, was also a bloody affair marked by widespread destruction and loss of life. Still, the enduring allure of Boudicca's story lies in its universal themes of resistance and defiance against oppression. She stands as a testament to the power of the human spirit to challenge injustice, a narrative that resonates with anyone who's ever faced a seemingly insurmountable adversary. But, as we strip away the layers of myth, we're left with a real woman who navigated the treacherous waters of Roman politics and warfare with remarkable tenacity. Boudicca's legacy also serves as a reminder of the cyclical nature of history. Empires rise and fall, rebellions ignite and are quelled. But the stories of those who stand up against overwhelming odds, whether in ancient Britain or anywhere else in the world, remain a potent reminder of the human capacity for courage and resilience. Her tale is not just a relic of the past, but a narrative thread that continues to weave through the fabric of history, challenging us to question authority and stand firm in our beliefs. So, as we draw this chapter to a close, let's leave with a sharp observation. History is a tapestry of stories, each thread adding depth and colour to the whole. Boudicca's rebellion may have ended in defeat, but her mythos has transcended time and culture, evolving into a symbol that still speaks to the struggles and triumphs of those who dare to defy. In the grand narrative of history, Boudicca is a reminder that while empires may crumble and heroes may fall, the spirit of resistance is immortal.